7th, 2022. I'll start by taking the roll of the open space board members. Caroline,
Present.
Michelle,
Here.
John,
Present.
Dave,
Here.
and I'm Karen Holweg, the chair, and I'm here. So we've got everybody here. And Allison, we're ready for you to go through your rules of the meeting.
Oops, okay. Do you all see that, the slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for joining us tonight. In order to strike a balance between meaningful and transparent engagement and online security, the following rules will be applied to tonight's meeting. This meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Activities that disrupt, delay, or interfere with the meeting are prohibited. The time for speaking or asking questions may be limited. No person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding, and no person shall speak for longer than the time allotted. Each person shall register to speak at the meeting using that person's real name. So if you've joined by phone or an iPad, you can rename yourself or the chat will come to me and I can rename you. No video will be permitted except for city officials, employees, and invited speakers. All others will participate by voice only. The person presiding at the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates any rule. The chat function is enabled and goes to the host only. It will go to me only, and it's for technical Zoom related questions, no content, please. Only the host and individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share their screen during the meeting. And when we get to public comment, if you want to raise your hand to get in line to speak, you can find that hand icon if you open the participants box, and then in the bottom right hand corner, click on those 3 dots for the raise hand, or sometimes people find it in their reactions icon along the bottom row on their screen as well. That's it.
Thanks, Allison. The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the minutes. And before we vote on approval, I'd like to ask if there are any corrections or suggestions.
In the minutes, it notes that Karen and Carolyn would write a letter to the Daily Camera, but in the letter, it was only you, Karen. I don't know if we should update that to reflect that or how we should handle that.
I have a question about that too. Thanks, John. What happened after the meeting is Caroline asked that I proceed and just send it in from me. So that was agreed upon one-on-one between me and Caroline. And I did not go back and look at the tape, so I don't know how declarative the decision about authorship was in the meeting. Leah, do you have any suggestions?
And just for me to add real quick, I worked with Karen on it and provided edits and did those, but it was really the majority, 98% of the work was Karen's. So I just wanted credit due where credit was due. So we did work on it together and drafts went back and forth. But like I said, Karen really did the lion's share of it. And moving forward, I'm happy to do more of this or write. I just didn't want to take credit for her work. But I was a part of the process and still happy to do it moving forward.
Thanks, Caroline. Leah?
I think, Karen, it's tricky just because the minutes reflect what happened at the meeting. It's hard to add in anything after. I think based on the topic, it seems like it would be fine to leave as is. Dan, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of a hard one when it's, I guess I would say leave it as is, because where the conversation was left during the meeting was the two of you would work on it together. So I would say leave it, but.
Yeah, I would like to chime in a little bit too. I think it's fine to leave it in as is. And the kind of the root of why we even said that 2 of the 5 board members could write a letter and represent themselves as open space board members is because we wanted you to have that official capacity to go ahead and represent yourselves as board members rather than private citizens. And so I think that leaving, you had the ability to put two names on it and you would be the 2 people, but it didn't necessarily have to go down in that way. That's my take on it.
And I agreed completely with what was written, and I thought Karen wrote a very good article. So it had nothing to do with non-agreement. So in that portion, I could have easily put my name with it and been agreeable to everything in the article. I just didn't want it to seem like I really authored it, because it, like I said, the lion's share of it was Karen's doing.
It was my impression after the discussion on April 13th that we were not going to refer to, as it says in the minutes, members of the Open Space Board of Trustees.
My understanding is that you could represent yourself as members of open space, but
okay.
not the board.
So you're not taking that as all of the members of the open space.
Right, that you are
Okay.
identifying yourselves as board members.
I understand. Thank you. I didn't read it that way, and that makes sense to me.
That makes sense to me as well. It was well written, and I just wanted to clarify on that point. I'm fine leaving it as is.
Okay, going back to page 1 of the minutes. My recollection on the nominations for chairperson and vice chair, I didn't think, Caroline, did you make all of those motions?
I believe I did.
Okay. Okay, and then the other, there's a tiny little typo 4 lines up from the bottom. It says provided an update, and the D needs to be deleted. Any other corrections or questions? Okay, is there a motion for approval?
I so moved to approve the minutes from our April meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the meetings for the April 13th meeting. All in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, the vote's unanimous.
Just to know, with procedures, when it comes to us raising our hand as opposed to speaking when we're on Zoom, is there a preference or?
Oh,
If you don't mind just either doing a roll call or speaking quick, that would be awesome. Some people aren't seeing the video, just on audio.
okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Dave? Your vote? Verbally?
Are you asking me? Yeah. Yes.
John,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Caroline,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Okay, there are no items on our agenda tonight that request public comment. So the next portion of the meeting is for anyone who has a comment to make to the board at this evening's meeting. If you would like to have an opportunity to make a public comment, would you please indicate so? Looks like Gary Sprung has his hand raised. Are there any others who would like to speak? Okay, Gary, you have 3 minutes, and Allison, can you
Yep.
put up the timer?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Oops. Let me. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Gary. I'll do that. All right. It's a little timer, but it's a lot of little steps to get it on. Okay, Gary, if you can unmute yourself and say your first and last name, then I'll start the timer.
Good evening. My name is Gary Sprung, and I live at 3675 Aspen Court in Boulder. I'm speaking tonight for Community Cycles about your consideration of rules for e-biking. Community Cycles generally supports e-bicycling on regional trails. We think that electrified Class 1 pedal assist only bicycles make sense on both Boulder County and City of Boulder open space properties. E-bikes are not that different from regular bicycles. They do not allow cycling at high speeds because they have built-in speed limiters. So their effect on other people and on the land is not much different from regular bicycles. E-bikes can help get more people bicycling, which is good for human health, good for appreciation of nature, and good for planet Earth. We especially need more people to accomplish their transportation objectives without resorting to internal combustion engines. Bicycling, including e-bikes, can help solve our global warming problem. So we hope you will liberalize the rule that currently prevents use of e-bikes on some regional trails, where the county would allow e-bikes if not for the city rule. Boulder Canyon is an obvious example. Many people would like to travel up the canyon from the city using e-bikes, both for recreation and transportation. For recreation, the path offers a connection to Chapman Drive and Batasso. For transportation, there are residents along 4 Mile Canyon who would be more likely to travel to town by bike if e-bikes were allowed. Please do what you can to promote the use of e-bicycles on Boulder County regional trails. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And Lynn, you're next.
Okay, Lynn, can you unmute yourself now?
Yeah. I see what's on your agenda tonight. Capital improvements, it's fire, it's flood. And you know, I gotta say, every meeting that I go to has everything to do with open space. And I follow planning board, landmarks board. You know, landmarks board, this guy wants to put up a big wall because of the noise on 9th Street has gotten so bad that instead of his wood fence, he needs a brick. And what happens when people like this are more affected by the noise? The brick wall isn't going to stop the noise. And he's on 9th and Spruce. And guess where he wants to go? He wants to go to the mountains. He wants open space. Space is everything to humans. Having some free open space around you and space in the mountains. And if we were back in caveman days and everyone, you know, could just put in their time and maintain it and collaborate to take care of it and technically purchase it by agreements. Nowadays we have money that's transacted, and CU's impact on this community is hefty. The East Boulder sub-community is going to add 11,000 people. How are you going to pay for it? How are they going to pay for all of the open space that we need? When they're east in the suburbs, basically, they want to be in Boulder, but they don't want to be in East Boulder sub-community, even if it's a nice community neighborhood. That might help to keep in the mayor a little bit. They are here for one thing. They're here for the mountains. And they've got to go to the mountains. And to get there, they congest and cause transportation issues. So I cover, I follow the Transportation Advisory Board also. And then the Planning Board, the Millennium Hotel is being developed by Landmark Development out of Georgia. Guess where Landmark was last? In Berkeley. Guess what Berkeley did when they expanded their impact so much on Berkeley? They capped enrollment. And guess what Landmark did when that happened? They came to Boulder. Just like my neighbor down the street in the Mapleton newsletter. She said, hey, me and my husband are in San Francisco. We saw a big caption on the side of the road that said, come to Boulder. That's really nice, but it's expensive. And you guys are going to deal with that. And after this fire, it's really expensive. And with flooding in South Boulder Creek, we've really got to slow things down before they overcome us and be preemptive.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any other people who would like to speak during public comment? Okay, it looks like it's time for matters from the department. So Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Just some opening remarks because tonight's matters from the department all have sort of a theme, and it's all sort of centered around the master plan in one way or another. And so we do have a specific item tonight that's to present an annual update. But in essence, all the items tonight support master plan implementation and report on either progress we've been making on implementation, or a peek ahead on some projects and staffing that will go towards implementation. And so I just want to read a few excerpts from the master plan on how the department will be tracking progress to give you a sense of a little bit of a sense too of why the agendas, some of the agendas are structured the way they are throughout the year. Because instead of relying on one single report, the staff has taken an approach of trying to build in sort of progress reporting, if you will, throughout the year in multiple different ways. And really the tracking the progress section of the master plan points to that. Now, and again, just some excerpts here. Staff will report annually on progress. Reporting will describe progress simply and graphically for a broad audience. Staff will also communicate successes, challenges, and propose next steps, and will adjust long-term work plans and budgets in response to feedback. Annual board engagement on master plan implementation progress will support the budget approval process and will include review of accomplishments of the past year, as well as progress updates and multi-year initiatives, preview of some future initiatives, and priorities for the annual budget request in support of master plan implementation. Through the approval process for the department's work planning and budget, the board and council will have an annual opportunity to review and discuss progress. So just kind of want to pick up on a little point that I raised last month at the meeting, and that is the presentation of progress updates on program areas within the department. So in the last 6 months or so, we've structured in an update on our wildlife program, agricultural program, water program. The human dimensions gave an update on our visitation data program. Volunteer services and learning and partnerships gave an update. Real estate reported on their activities, including the residential assessment. Trailheads provided a good overview from an asset management standpoint, and signs did as well. And that theme is going to continue in the coming months. The Ranger services are going to present an update on their programming, and you'll get a nice robust program early this fall, later this summer on our trails program and our undesignated trails program. So with all that said, tonight we also are going to hear another program update, and that is from our resource information services work group, and they're sort of and we put them in tonight because they're the unsung heroes, if you will. They're sort of providing the support that all these work groups rest on in terms of the data support they need, the analytical support, the analysis, and the technologies they need for us to basically do our work. And of course, we're going to start off tonight with a report on the budget. We're going to provide you your first glimpse into the details of the 2023 Capital Improvement Program budget. And then we'll follow that up next month with the approval recommendation of that budget. And we'll move on to the operating portion of the budget. So again, it's all really linked to master plan implementation. And so I just wanted to set that stage, because at the end of our matters, we will conclude by providing a master plan progress report with some highlights from last year, as well as a sneak peek ahead on some high-level initiatives. And then we will also want to daylight and walk through how to utilize an interactive map that was built for members of the public, for them to be able to go in and look at some projects that are either underway or that are proposed in the coming months and year on various programs that we have. And Chad will basically explain a little bit about that map, its creation, how to get on it, and we'll do a little dancing and narration of walking us through how to utilize it. So with that, we're going to start off with a touch on the budget and CIP in particular. And with that, I'm going to introduce Sam McQueen and Cole Moffitt. Sam is our Senior Manager of Business Services, and Cole is our Senior Accountant. Take it away.
Everybody. Sam, do you have the presentation to pull up? Perfect. So hello and welcome to the May business meeting. Like Dan said, my name is Cole Moffitt, and tonight myself and Sam McQueen will be presenting the 2023 draft CIP. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this calendar, tonight is the second touch on the 2023 budget, in which we will focus on the proposed CIP. The first draft of the CIP will be submitted to the city on May 20th, in just a short while, with final recommendations slated for June 8th. One thing to note is that we were anticipating having updated revenue figures for tonight's business meeting. However, finance has pushed this information back until May 24th. So we do not currently have that, and we will cover that in June's presentation. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be discussing tonight, including a budget process update, capital expenditures overview, some CIP trends, and proposed 2023 CIP projects. So to start, since our last April meeting, the special adjustment to base for the Marshall Fire was approved and accepted by City Council. This includes 1.6 million in estimated damages, the 2-year extension of the position to support FEMA reimbursement, and 10,000 in grant revenue from the History Colorado for the Foxstone Barn. In addition, the normal annual first adjustment to base was submitted to finance for review and was approved in late April. And this includes our 2021 capital carryover to 22. And for a list of what the adjustment to base items included, you can reference your April OSBT packets. Thank you. So as I mentioned in the opening slides, the revenue update was pushed back from April 26th to May 24th, and we will provide an update of those figures at the June business meeting. We continue to anticipate that 2021 revenues will outperform expectations, and these assumptions have been built into the development of the 2023 draft CIP. Just a reminder that budget guidelines are expected from the finance department and are subject to change as we go throughout the year. And finance provides us with a 6-year revenue forecast on a rolling annual calendar without years ending through 2028. So we're looking at the window of 2023 to 2028. OSMP also expects an increase to cost allocation this year after several years of it being flat or decreasing. We will talk about cost allocation more in depth in July, but it will be helpful to hear your questions on cost allocation after tonight's presentation, so we can come back to you with answers at that time. So after tonight, feel free to email any questions, and we will send to the finance department and be prepared to answer those as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So diving into CIP, here are some of the basic elements of a capital project. Projects should typically either create, maintain, or enhance a public infrastructure. They are discrete projects with a defined start and end date over $50,000 in cost, or projects of the same type totaling more than $50,000. CIP projects typically do not build in FTE additions. The operating budget supports our standard hires and our FTEs, and we want to adhere to the definitions and transparency with Planning Board. In 2023, the open space CIP represents about 20% of the overall budget. Ongoing projects and projects that do not meet the definition of CIP are located in the operating budget. And these types of projects are not a major source of department expenditures. And so looking at a few trends, here is a 10-year picture of the CIP from 2014 to 2023. And so to start, the draft 2023 CIP landed right around, or currently is about right around 7.1 million, which represents an increase of about 1.7 million over the 5.3 in 2022. And so just to dive into what you're seeing here and the ups and downs. So in 2016, 17, and 18, there was a push to focus on completing 2013 flood recovery projects. We had a deadline of FEMA to complete all construction by 2018. So that's why you see those 3 years increase to meet that deadline. In 2019, the reduction and the roll-off of the 0.11 sales tax increment and the end of the general fund transfer in that same year required decreased spending. And while CIP increased CIP spending was planned in 2020 after the extension of the 0.15% sales tax, COVID-19 impacted expected revenue collections. And in 2021, OSMP participated in citywide requirements to reduce 10% of budget due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which impacted the CIP. And we were able to increase spending in 2022 with revenues from the extension of the 0.15 sales tax increment and the roll off of the Longs Garden payment in 2021. And so better than expected 2021 revenues presented last month at the April business meeting anticipated revenue recovery from COVID-19, and the dollars from the 0.15 sales tax will allow us to program additional dollars into the CIP in 23, which is why you see the upward trend going there into the future.
Thanks, Cole. Hi and good evening, trustees. I'll start by sharing some details about OSMP's CIP trends by budget category. So the city categorizes CIP projects as capital maintenance, enhancement, planning, or new facility and infrastructure. We've made an effort as a department to focus on capital maintenance projects that take care of what we have since 2019 to align with master plan guidance. You'll see in orange that a majority of funds in 2023 are directed toward capital maintenance, as they have been for the last few years. We're proposing more dollars toward capital enhancement in blue than the 2022 CIP budget for projects like trail study area implementations. So as Cole laid out, better than expected 2021 revenues, anticipated revenue recovery from COVID-19, and dollars from the 0.15% sales tax increment will allow OSMP to focus on these enhancement projects while still enabling us to increase our capital maintenance projects from previous years. The next few slides will focus on CIP alignment with the master plan. We continue to incorporate master plan guidance in the CIP with an emphasis on tier 1 strategies and are excited to build on reporting of the CIP in this way from previous years. As a reminder, our CIP projects align with the 5 focus areas of the master plan and their corresponding strategies. They are ecosystem health and resilience, responsible recreation stewardship and enjoyment, agriculture today and tomorrow, community connection, education and inclusion, and financial sustainability. Many projects address multiple master plan strategies, and OSMP's work planning system allows for each project to link up to 3 strategies referred to as primary, secondary, and tertiary. Project managers have assigned percentages to each strategy. For example, I'll walk through the tall oak grass management project. It's captured in the draft 2023 CIP as follows. So 60% or $45,000 of funding is focused on the primary strategy, which is tier 1, preserve and restore important habitat blocks and corridors. 30% or $22,500 is focused on the secondary strategy, tier 2, control invasive species. And the remaining 10% or $7,500 is focused on the tertiary strategy, tier 1, address the global climate crisis here and now. While some projects may focus different percentages on their primary, secondary, and tertiary strategies, or may not identify one of those categories, this percentage breakdown is a useful way to report master plan alignment in a detailed way. The budget numbers you'll see in the rest of this presentation incorporate this breakdown of projects by strategy. In the master plan, OSMP committed to accelerating and emphasizing strategies identified as tier 1 with more staff time and funding, especially in the first few years of master plan implementation. We can now share investments over time with 4 budget years underway since the master plan was approved. You can see on the left from 2020 to the draft 2023 CIP, 71% of funding for projects has focused on tier 1 strategies. The financial sustainability focus area is removed from this chart because those categories reinforce the work of the other 4 service areas. So we'll take a look at investments against the 5 focus areas of the master plan in the next few slides. This chart shows budget alignment across the focus areas. To walk through an example of the information presented here, we'll look at the first row, ecosystem health and resilience. The first column of numbers shows the target range for CIP spending over a 10-year period, as identified in the master plan. OSMP aims to budget 25 to 40% of CIP dollars for ecosystem health and resilience over a 10-year period. In 2020, 26% of the CIP budget went toward the focus area, 47% in 2021, and so on. The rightmost column shows cumulative spending toward the focus area over the 4 budget years since the master plan was approved. OSMP has budgeted 32% of CIP dollars toward ecosystem health and resilience over those 4 years. Generally, OSMP has spent within our target CIP range for each focus area since the master plan was approved, with a majority of investments geared toward ecosystem health and resilience, followed by responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment. Taking a look at just 2023, the proposed increased funding for responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment over the previous year supports investments like North Trail Study Area implementation and trail repair projects. Even so, cumulative investments over a 4-year period are still highest in the ecosystem health and resilience focus area, which is consistent with the 10-year master plan target range. We presented 35 CIP projects in the memo. Turning to specific project highlights, OSMP is proposing investments in North Trail Study Area implementation in 2023, specifically Eagle Trail restoration and repair, North Sky Trail and associated restoration, and Wonderland Lake projects. With revenues predicted to increase over the previous year, we're able to address these types of priority commitments and plans. The 3 projects tied to North Trail Study Area implementation total $1.66 million, which represents 23% of the draft 2023 CIP. The investment covers what it takes to implement entire projects, including restoration and construction activities. We're also proposing continued investments in prairie dog management and implementation of the preferred alternative approach. Restoration of irrigated agricultural fields with prairie dog conflict has been funded in the CIP for a few years. And prairie dog conservation and management is an ongoing project in the CIP and focuses on relocation, barrier construction, and implementation surveys to gauge public awareness. Funding has fluctuated over the years based on specific needs within the project. So the prairie dog conservation and management project was funded at an enhanced level in 2021 So that's why you see existing funding that could cover deliverables under that project in 2022. Additional investments will be made again in 2023. Overall, $740,000 of the draft CIP will be allocated to these projects. So to close, as we look toward our next business meeting and recommendations for the CIP, does the OSBT have any clarifying questions regarding the department's draft 2023 CIP?
Thank you very
Yes,
much to both of you for your nice presentation. Questions?
yeah, thank you for the presentation and thank you for the memo, Sam and Cole. One tiny thing is to, some bigger font would be awesome. Use some of that white space, especially with so many numbers on a page. But I have some clarifying questions. I know I pressed last meeting about just this definition of capital and just the mechanics of spending $7 million, it going onto the balance sheet and then getting depreciated, which I think is, and I read that you are conforming with GAAP. And so I believe that that mechanic is true, right? The $7.1 million gets spent and then put onto the balance sheet and then depreciated over time. Okay. So, and then when I look at the project list, I'm just trying to understand how some of these projects sort of fit that. So on page 2 of your memo, talk about the definition of a capital project and project type. And it's generally defined as physical assets with a usable life of at least 3 years. So when I look at the list of CIP projects, I just wonder how that all fits in. Like the prairie dog conservation and management, there are 2 different lines for it, one for 350 and one for 390. And like, I understand the physical barriers and the need to enhance those, like the irrigation and all of that for the express purpose of prairie dog management. But are you putting things in there like the substances used to manage the prairie dogs, or is it really just like the physical parts of that?
Yeah, I'll address the first piece of that. So in terms of depreciation, so the city capitalizes physical assets over $5,000. And so that would be things like equipment, facilities, things like that, anything over $5,000, and then keeps track of depreciation because over time for those assets. In terms of what we put into our capital improvement program, a lot of it is not capitalized and calculated for depreciation in the same way because of they are physical assets, but they're not $5,000 worth of assets. So a trail is not something that we typically calculate depreciation for. So our accounting department doesn't typically include that in our the comprehensive annual financial report. But we capitalize it because it does include, it really includes maintenance over long periods of time, major expenditures of dollars over 50,000. And we really want to focus on transparency with the planning board of what's happening in the city and how we're spending our dollars on big projects like this. So we do put them in the CIP to address the types of things that get included in our CIP. We try to be comprehensive in the things that get purchased. So a large dollar amount would include equipment to perform the work if needed. It would include hiring contractors to perform the work. So we, again, like we may not actually be purchasing the equipment ourselves and things like that. So it really covers the entire scope of the project when we propose these dollar amounts.
Okay. And I just wonder like why the visitor communication and education enhancements are not in the operating budget. Why are they in the capital budget?
Yeah,
And maybe I'm the only one who's hung up about this.
Yeah, no, Sam, you can answer that direct question, but Michelle, I think you're pointing out to something that you're sort of correct. An open space department is a bit of an oddity for a city government in terms of traditional, what you would call the traditional definitions of capital. So we've been working over the years with city staff, finance department staff on sort of tweaking our capital improvement program so everybody is sort of feels comfortable that the spirit and the definitional stuff is met from an open space perspective and a citywide perspective. But you're right, you know, our department's a bit of an oddity, and it doesn't fit as nicely as like building a brand new building or putting in a big parking garage or something like that. So I do want to just honor your point that I could see why there's a little bit of confusion, but just because the open space department and what we do and our responsibilities for enhancements and maintenance is a bit of an oddball. So
Yeah, and I may be the only one who's hung up on it because I read these words like management, and that does not, to me, in my wiring, correspond with capital. Education, although I know these are super valuable, I'm not diminishing that at all. You know, visitor communication and education enhancements. And is that infrastructure? Is it, you know, and like I said, I just, yeah, go for it, Mark.
No, it's a great point. Remember the CIP planning, excuse me, CIP planning, CIP maintenance, CIP new infrastructure. So there is a planning side of the CIP. And we, as I always say, planning typically used to be 10%. Now it's up to 15% of the total cost of a project. And that is included as part of the CIP project. So sometimes education work might be an interpretive plan to inform then the interpretive infrastructure. Other pieces of this are like interpretive signage, interpretive facilities to support the department needs. So that's, to my mind, that's the difference between the two. Hopefully that explains it.
yeah, and on that, Michelle, for instance, deploying mobile hotspot technologies, sign infrastructure is a big item under that one. So, you know, there are a lot of physical infrastructure built into that one item.
Yeah, that's a good example. That makes sense to me. I appreciate that one.
And isn't it also linked to the whole asset management process with the new software, Dan? That the reason why that you're leaving the natural resources part for last, because it's so difficult to quantify the asset that you list in the software when it's populations of deer or grasshopper sparrows or something.
Right. So, and Dave, I want to use the word you like, but I forgot it already. So I'll just say green assets. But yeah, so we have an asset class that is very different than most the accountants or whatever would be thinking about an asset. But built into the CIP, there's sprinkling of asset management in our CIP, including getting at a very specific strategy for how to provide some more baseline assessments of our green assets. We're referring it to an eco map project, but that's sort of our strategy to get towards the asset management element of that particular class of assets that we have. And there's dollars dedicated to the CIP for that.
Is that all you had, Michelle?
Yeah, and I know you were asking for clarifying questions, but I don't know if we actually want to talk about the project list. If any other people have clarifying questions.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I'm still having trouble with the two big tables in the both in the in the memo. And my problem is that I talked with Dan earlier that the numbers associated with the projects or the focus areas are all different, or most of them are different, but they all end up totaling the same. And so I think it's very confusing to present the information this way. And I guess to be more productive, if in fact a project has a multiple work group association, it strikes me that it would be most helpful in the CIP discussion or the presentation of information to have that broken out, because I know that some of the numbers in the tier table or the focus area table include more than just the capital fund contribution, and so I think it would be clearer both for the board as well as the public, if we're going to break it out like that, we ought to be putting it so that people can understand, here's what the capital contribution is for the total project. Here's what the operating contribution is. Here's what the grant contribution is, or however it needs to be split out. Because again, I think it's very confusing to have these projects and have completely different numbers associated with them. For example, in the table, which is not actually, it's the recommended, again, I think it's the 2023 CIP projects. The North Trail Study Area Implementation, Eagle Trail Restoration comes in at 515,000 on the table that's on page 12. And then I'm looking over in the other table, the new trail or trail maintenance is 690,000. And so, the Eagle Trail looks like it's 75% of the total trail maintenance component for 2023. And another example is is kind of the same one, is the North Sky Trail, which looks like on the first table on page 10 that it's in the Build New Trails is guided by past and future plans. So that's what the North Sky Trail is. Here it comes in at $996,000, whereas in the other table it comes in at $518,000. And again, it just strikes me that we're presenting a lot of information, but we don't want it to be confusing or misleading. And I think we need to focus on, if we want to break out, the various contributions to the funding of projects, we should do that, or we should have a singular table that has, the specific projects with the CIP funding. Anyway, so the question is that an accurate assessment, or am I missing something?
I can start, I'll start, and then Dan, if you want to jump in with any other clarifications, I'll share my screen again, just to walk through one piece, and then we'll explain something here. So I'm just bringing up a slide that I had previously shared. So each of in the table that has the list of all of the 2023 CIP projects, you see the total dollar amount associated with those projects. So if you're looking at tall oak grass management, for instance, you're seeing $75,000 associated with that project in the table. On the back end in our work planning system, we've developed a way to have 3 different strategies tied to that one project. So instead of just saying, oh, this only supports one project, we've really tried to break it out and say, what percentage of the project actually goes towards which strategies? And so, for instance, here for the primary strategy, 60% of the funding from the $75,000 goes towards this preserve and restore important habitat blocks and corridors. So when we're calculating for the table that you're referring to that has the breakdown of strategies, that table only incorporates CIP, which is why you see the numbers totaling the same 7.1 million. We are only focusing on CIP for our master plan alignment in this memo. So as an example, I will also share you had shared reduced trail maintenance backlog. And so,
let me interrupt you
Yep.
just while this is still up. So I guess my question is, and maybe it's a suggestion, is if tall oak grass has these three components, why aren't we listing the tall oak grass project as a 2023 CIP line, and then break it out in these various components, which would then kind of associate with the specific strategies. It just strikes me that there's a part of the conversation that is missing in order for someone to interpret exactly kind of what is constituting a total of these projects.
So I think what you're suggesting, Dave, is we eliminate the table that's on page 10
That would be one.
and instead incorporate it under the items, under the recommended 2023 CIP projects, right?
Yes, if that is doable. I mean, I don't want it to be, again, so complicated or convoluted that still people can't understand it. But if we want to associate project components with various strategies, then I think for the public and for the board to understand completely about, okay, what contribution is being made from or for what strategy, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and that would help in answering the kinds of questions that I had when I looked at the master plan strategy table. For instance, where under a tier 1 RRSE1, it says assess and manage increasing visitation. And my reaction is, so what projects are being done to manage increasing visitation? And if it were done as Dave just suggested, I could see that on the recommended 2023 CIP project list.
Yeah, in the absence of that, what one has to do is interpolate basically from one table to the other, saying, okay, well, in the strategy one, there's this total number. And so looking at specific projects, do those projects add up? Are those the projects that are actually?
Well, and there's not enough information to really do that, right?
Right. Or I may be wrong, but and other people may not feel that that's a big deal, but it just strikes me that it could be a lot clearer and actually probably more persuasive if in fact we did it that way, so people could see, kind of with each project, what the various funding components are.
yeah, I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Just for reference, some portion of the assess and manage increased visitation, includes some portions of the Gebhard site plan implementation, North Trail study area implementation, Repair Eagle Trail. So I'm understanding what you're saying. We have the ability to do that breakout and we have that information. You're asking to see it sort of in a flipped way than we've proposed it.
I think in simple terms, combine the two into one table.
Yeah, that'd be good. And I do appreciate, I think the bar graph that you showed previously,
Yeah.
The total expenditures proposed for each focus area is good. So then we as a board can compare, okay, this is how much money we're spending, for ecosystem resiliency as opposed to, recreation and things like that. That would be, I think that's very informative. Thank you.
Sam,
Caroline?
I want to just confirm that combining that table is definitely doable. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Great. I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, Caroline?
Hey, thank you guys for that update. That was really good. A couple of questions, and if you guys already touched on it, I'm sorry, my brain doesn't feel 100% tonight. I'm looking at our packet from last year, and it said that we expected the CIP to increase, and then discussing where to program the additional revenue. The department determined that increases should be allocated across both CIP and operating budgets. I know you said that we don't have the revenue yet, Is that still the plan?
Yeah, so what we've presented is that half of that statement, which is the CIP. We are predicting that we're going to be in a better place for revenues just based off of what we're seeing from the 2021 numbers that have come in. We'll have a lot more information to share in June when we have those updated forecasts from the finance department. And we'll be able to share if and where we will make additional investments in the operating budget. And if, what requests we're making for the operating budget side.
And would we consider the department to be fully, quote unquote, restored from the 10% cutback that was required for everyone across COVID?
Yeah, so we actually made those restorations in 2022. We're glad that we were able to do that. And we've continued those restorations and we hope to carry them also into 2023. So those restorations are currently back on our budget right now.
Okay. And then again, I'm sorry if someone said this, looking at the packet from last year, under the year 2022, discussing revenue projections, it gives it to you from 2021 to 2027. So you have 6 years of figures. And 2022 is when it jumps from 25 million to 29 million expected revenue. So it's a pretty decent increase from the year before. Did we say why or what that is? And again, if you need to wait till the next meeting because we're not discussing this now, but I was just curious what the big jump was.
Yeah, I can share some high level details and then we'll be able to share more specifics when we get those projections. And then especially as we dig into operating budget in July and August, we'll have even more details to share there. Generally, so we get 6-year projections, 6-year forecasts for our revenues from the finance department. We expect another 6 years. They update the 6 years every time. So if we have a projection for 2023 from last year, they'll update that projection again and we'll incorporate that new number into our budget. The jump was really, it's sort of what we're expecting now that we are anticipating some level of revenue recovery from 2020 and 2021 numbers. And so that's where those are coming from. The finance department works closely with CU to come up with those projections, and they generally pick more of the conservative projection. So we feel typically confident that they're not overestimating our revenues. And so we are usually pretty comfortable taking the estimates that they give us. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. This might be a dumb question, but none of that is federal dollars. Is that correct?
So that's correct. Yeah, we don't, that is all revenues from sales and use tax and investments and things like that.
And then I know that you're relatively new, so if it's easier for someone else to answer the question, just because I don't know when it just got brought up, and I feel like when we discuss finance, it does. Can someone describe to me the engagement or process the city does with CU when doing these budgets? I don't know if having a large university in a city, if that's kind of a normal thing that the university and the city does with each other, or if that's unique to Boulder, and what their process is.
Yeah, so every city will be different. In previous years, the finance department will work directly with CU economists and present at city council with those economists. And so the projections are really, they come up with the projections together. And I'm not sure, I actually am not quite sure what they're planning to do for the later May presentation, but in previous years, like I mentioned, they have actually presented it together.
But those numbers from the business school don't necessarily have to do with the growth of the university. The budget of the university, as opposed to the university economic expertise in the business department.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're looking at national trends of the economy, local trends, how, and then putting it together on how sales tax might be impacted. And yeah, really nothing to do with the university other than the fact that those economists are employed there.
Okay. John, do you have some questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, my questions revolve around the increase in capital enhancement and capital maintenance. And I know from our work on the master plan that reducing the backlog of maintenance needs was a huge theme in the master plan in just about every topic area. And my question is, if we are trying to get rid of the maintenance backlog, and yet we're increasing the number of trail miles that need to be maintained, how do we make sure that in 10 years, we're going to be ahead of the game?
I'll answer in two different ways, and I'd welcome Sam and Lauren or any deputies to chime in too. So I think the first question is we'll have to also look at the operating budget, because a lot of our maintenance type projects are embedded in our operating budget.
Okay.
For instance, all of our trail staff that are out there working on maintenance projects, that is all funded out of our operating budget. Typically, maintenance projects from a trails perspective are a lower cost. Obviously, this CIP has a couple of very significant maintenance projects in the Eagle Trail. And there's also one CIP item of the contracted crews that we bring on for trail maintenance. That is the other big ticket item in the CIP. So there are some pretty major investments in the CIP. But for using trails as an example, the bulk of all of our trail maintenance programs will be funded from our operating. And I think that will be true for a lot of our asset management work. But CIP certainly does represent some significant investments in that area. Specifically, if I'll just point out to prior commitments that we made to the community, in which the master plan does recognize that the master plan is made up of prior plans that have been approved by council and recommended by board and had significant community input. So in the case of North Trail Study Area, that was a plan that was approved in 2016. It really isn't until 2023 that we are finally spending construction dollars to implement, just starting to implement portions of that North Trail Study Area. So I just want to paint that picture, because it wasn't like the plan was approved in 2016, and then 2017 we drastically changed our budget to go address that particular enhancements that came out of that plan. We've tried to do it in a more longer term sustained approach, so we didn't have to sacrifice one for the other. And so we do feel like with some enhanced revenue projections that we're able to sort of do both. We're able to finally get to some implementation of an important trail study area plan that was approved, while maintaining and even increasing investments in the on the maintenance side. But back to the first point, we'll call some of that out, Karen, in our operating budget, and maybe bring some specific examples of where asset management is being addressed in the operating budget as well.
Jeff, I saw you turn your camera on. Did you want to say anything about that?
No, I think Dan covered it very well. I was just going to see if there's any follow-up needed, but yeah, Dan pretty much hit the nail on the head for sure.
Okay, and so it seems to me there's a bit of a problem with needing to approve the CIP before we get to the operating budget, so that we can't see the interaction between the two and what progress we're making on reducing the trail maintenance backlog, and how much we're investing in that, both within the CIP and the operating budget, because we have to deal with one of them at a time.
A question for you, Karen. Would that change your decision to follow a recommendation on implementation of plans that were approved 6 years ago?
No,
I
no,
mean, I know
no.
we're balanced
My
because
concern-
capital.
No, my concern is whether we are in fact reducing the trail maintenance backlog. As we said in the master plan, was an extremely high priority. And we can't really know that until we consider both the CIP and the operating budget, because they both address that.
Unless there's maybe something in Beehive. I don't know how often that's been used, but that was the point of when we approved that as well.
So just getting outside of this annual year and looking at 10-year implementation of the master plan and annual reports, and I'll just so everybody has this context. So from a trails maintenance standpoint, as everybody knows, we monitor 20% of the system in any given year. So every 5 years, we're able to sort of sweep the system and give us a status report of how things are doing from a condition standpoint. So using that as an example, our plan as you know, we have these program updates, which are done monthly. We have annual budgets and work plans, which we daylight where we're sort of putting our investment from a percentage standpoint. And then at the 5th year sort of master plan period, we're proposing to do a pretty extensive check-in, if you will, in which we're going to present, for lack of a better word, a scorecard type of thing of where we are at based on these monthly and annual investments, where we're at from a trend standpoint, from, let's say, overall trail condition. Are we moving the needle? And then that will allow us time to basically look into the back half of that 10-year period and say, is there any adjustments we need to do in the tiering? Do some tier 2 strategies need to move to tier 1? Are we starting to feel confident that some of these tier 1s are well underway and we want to switch it out with a tier 3 strategy? So the tiering, the 5-year check-in will allow us the time to really look at where we're moving the needle after 5 years of annual investments, and then help for us to really strategically work together and collaborate as a board and a staff and as a community to say, do we need to make any major adjustments to the master plan moving into the back half of the plan in terms of any redoing of our tiering or where our emphasis needs to be? So that I know this doesn't help from this annual perspective, but that I think will help maybe paint a picture of how monthly updates and annual updates feed into a 5-year check-in and then a 10-year renewal of a plan.
And Karen, I could just add, you know, as Dan mentioned, sorry, Caroline, I'll just respond real quick. As Dan started out the meeting this evening, talking about the overall view of the master plan. In fact, one of the next agenda items where we go through that master plan update, one of the things you'll see is we're going to just present some very brief visual information about our web-based project map. And even that can help illuminate and really see all the various projects that we do have that might not be captured in our capital, but as Dan mentioned, are included in our operating by using junior rangers, ready to work, volunteers. So there's a wealth of projects. I mean, I can just say off the cuff that I feel confident we are reducing that backlog. And I really appreciate that question, because also as a new staff member to the team, that was one of my key questions is, are we really making a dent on that backlog? And as I've engaged with the staff and learned more, I've certainly seen the evidence of that. And so just wanted to share also, as we get into the next item with the master plan update, I can speak to that a bit. And then when we show those maps, you'll see it as well. So just want to add that too.
Thanks, Jeff. And I have a suggestion when we get there too, of how for all of us, that might become more transparent.
Great.
Caroline, do you have a question?
Yeah, if this isn't in the right spot, Karen, you can stop me and I can ask it later if it's more appropriate there. But when you made the statement about approving one function without being able to see the other, I immediately thought about Beehive because when we approved the full-time position, if I'm getting that right, Beehive at that point was expected to 100% cover all of the trails within a 4-year period. So if that's still moving forward at that rate, then I think that that would make any decisions or questions that you have related to that a lot easier. So I don't know if anyone can talk about that, if this is the right time for that.
Yeah, so we monitor 20% of the trail system every year. So every 5 years, we'll have every 4 to 5 years, we'll have a sort of a complete look. We'll have an analysis period after that, Caroline. It's just, the day after that last trail is monitored, then you take all the information, you'll do some analysis and get ready to be able to present out on that. So one thing that we can be prepared for is this fall, I think early fall, Jeff, the Trails program will be providing this board with an update on the trail program. And while we wouldn't be having gone through a full cycle and be prepared to report out on that, we could certainly hit on the Beehive aspect, the condition aspect and maybe we even report out on some things that we're seeing on some completed sections of monitoring. And then of course at the 5-year period, we'll report out on the whole system having been monitored and where we're at compared to where we were at a couple of years ago.
Sorry, I feel like I saw Dave trying to talk too, so I'll make it quick. Do you feel that Beehive is doing what it was planned to do? Are there any disruptions with it? And then I guess kind of an add-on to that is, I think I understood that like the whole city was going to be using Beehive and various functions. Does it seem like it's being implemented in the other departments in Boulder, or?
Dan, I could speak to that just a bit. Yeah, Beehive, Caroline, you're exactly right. Beehive is an amazing tool that we can use for asset management. And certainly many departments that deal with infrastructure are using Beehive or some similar software. That's the great benefit of Beehive. It's relational across many departments. So other departments can see where trails are located or roads, bridges, et cetera. So we can always be planning together and, as an example, not disrupting each other's infrastructure. I would say it has been successful. Our team is consistently learning new ways to use it or how to, refining our ways of how we use it most effectively. Anything from our various like temporary staff out in the field using it to update condition information or make changes in how the condition of the trail is or the work they did that day and logging that. So it's a very effective tool. And like Dan said, in September, when we come back, both with our trails program and undesignated trails, we can show that longitudinal kind of look over time and give a status of where we're at. But Beehive, it is a pretty advanced, sophisticated tool, and we're working. In fact, we just had a meeting this week, how we incorporate data and how we use that data to really be strategic. So it's looking at what do we have, what's the current condition, if something needs to be repaired, how do we repair it? We can schedule that, we can plan that. And that's really what's informing this CIP as Sam is presenting. The other thing too, what trails are interesting. A lot of times, to your point, Karen, if we're building a new trail, it might actually be an area where there was an undesignated trail or a route that's, it's actually had an impact on an ecosystem value, something to do with the land. And so, a lot of times it's hard to talk about trails in the right context because sometimes what we're doing is improving an existing area that people have been going, and then we move, like Upper Bear Canyon we're working on right now. We're getting the trail out of the wetland, out of the more sensitive riparian area, and putting it on a slope where it's less impact on the ecosystem, as an example. So those are the kind of things we're doing with the data to really make sure we're reducing that backlog of maintenance, getting rid of the problem. So all that to say, and we can talk more in a moment during the master plan update too. And September will be the big data dump and really showing where we're at.
And is that because you stated that you had evidence that the trail maintenance backlog was, being dealt with or reduced. Is that where you got that evidence from? Was from the data from Beehive?
Yeah, as Dan was mentioning, we have I don't want to get too into the detail. In fact, we've got some data folks coming up next in the agenda, but yeah, we're using Beehive to capture that data along with other tools. We have a program called HETAP. So long story short, there's people out in the field with eyes on the trails, on the system, downloading information, capturing data in Beehive, again, that we can look at. What's the most critical condition? We can overlay that with visitation. If we see over time a trail is getting more visitation, what's the impact that's having? That's why, this past couple of years, we've been working on Royal Arch, highly visited trail, high impact. Once that trail is eroded and damaged, it's unsafe. It's harder to bring it back to an acceptable standard condition. So yeah, Beehive is the tool that's really helping inform that. So great observation.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think we did a Beehive sort of tutorial maybe about 18 months ago for this board. And I'm wondering, Karen, we could talk about whether or not we want to do sometime in the near future, 2023, 2022, whether we should come back and get an updated status report on Beehive, because at that time Beehive was, I think we were in our second or third year of using it. And
pretty much just setting it up based on what I remember.
Well, you have to first inventory, for instance, trails or bridges and roads. Where is all of our bridges and roads? Put them in the system. Then what's the condition of the bridges and roads? And then using the condition report, what is your priorities and what's your annual work plan going to be to hit your highest priorities based on what that data was? And so we've been sequencing in, loading all of our asset classes into Beehive. And of course, one of the most difficult one is sort of the natural resource asset class. But yet I think we're cracking the code on that one. So
okay, we have about 5 minutes left for this segment of the agenda. Dave?
Sorry, the other data thing was called SheTab or HETAB?
HETAP, HETAP, tap. Yeah.
Dave?
So I want to make sure that I think Karen asked a very important question in that we don't lose the message. And that is, we as a board the message is we as a board are needing to see the operating and capital improvement budget conversation more closely aligned. And I don't know, maybe Dan, why the CIP budget gets first crack in the city process before the operating budget, but it strikes me that from the open space program perspective, we may only tentatively want to approve a CIP until we've had a chance to look at the operating budget and then come back and make a formal or official decision on both budgets, because it strikes me that if those budgets are so closely aligned, breaking them apart by several months distance is not helpful. And from my perspective, I think the operating budget should be the primary budget conversation initially, and then the CIP budget conversation subsequent to that. But anyway, that's the message, I think, is that we need to have those budget conversations more closely aligned. And if in fact the CIP budget conversation has to occur initially, then there ought to be some flexibility or accommodation for us as a board to return and make sure that we've aligned the various aspects of both of those budget conversations so that they make sense in the coming year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Dave. I could tell you from a department only perspective that we have been moving toward a strategy of trying to merge those timelines. The city as a whole has some various deadlines that sort of presents this an inherent challenge. And, you know, I don't know if Lauren wants to pop in and speak a little bit about the city structure, but Dave, I agree. I think, and we are moving towards our work planning processes and timelines from a department standpoint to get closer and closer aligned in that. We're not there yet. And because the city puts deadlines up front on the CIP, it just sort of forces our hand of where we need to be. But that doesn't mean that we can't keep making progress as a department to eventually get them aligned. But Lauren, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, we actually philosophically, I think, agree with you. And we've made a couple of runs at that kind of citywide. The previous budget officer had looked into the city charter and the way those things were spelled out when all of this first started. And it actually designates two separate processes with two separate approval streams in like the city regulations. So the previous budget officer was actually interested in exploring something similar, and it ended up that this was not the time to be able to change that. So the CIP goes through planning board, which is what Sam's been mentioning. So the sort of process is OSBT recommendation in time for planning board review, and then city council, where the operating budget goes through the executive budget team, city manager's office, board and council. So it's codified in some way, and I don't remember the specifics on that. But what we've been trying to work on, to Dan's point, now that we have the work planning software, is there something we can do as a department in our presentations to the board? It wouldn't change what we're doing with planning board or executive budget team or council, but is there a way we could better align those things for you when we come to the board? So we're in the middle. So for example, in the CIP packets, we present you all these charts, right? Like, here it is by focus area. And we have not done things like that on the operating side because you're talking about 320 projects. So we are internally working on aligning our ongoing services to the work planning system the same way that you see it at CIP. So we can, in terms of getting you anything by June, I think what we can say is we do anticipate increases. We anticipate that one of the biggest increases for the operating budget will be the ongoing component for the comp and class project, the salary stuff that we talked about in the April packet. We'll have some small increases elsewhere, but the storytelling piece is what's missing right now. How to take a percentage of an FTE or a percentage of an ongoing program or project and tie it to a strategy. So that's what we're working on internally right now.
Great. Well, we would encourage that to continue to happen. And just suffice to say that I think moving along that continuum would be very helpful for the board's, kind of assessment of the budget in general.
Yeah. Yep. And understanding what's happening. I have a few quick questions before we go on. And I'd like to ask them, they're on page 11 and 12 in the project listings, so that I can understand what's a little bit more about what's there. I don't see anything about the trail work on Sanitas that's been going on. Is that in the operating budget, or, I mean, that's a huge trail project.
Jeff, did you want to speak to that one?
Is it on this list? Is it on this list at all? And if so, where is the short question?
I don't believe it's with, oh, go ahead, Cole.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, from what I understand, the hire youth corps and contracted crews for trail projects, a bit of that we used to hire ACE Corp, and they have historically worked on Sanitas in there. So I know some of that 275,000 is worked on Sanitas almost annually, but not the entire amount of that. But,
so where are you on the project table on 11 and 12?
It's on the first page, maybe about 8 or 9 down.
Yeah,
Hire youth
fourth
corps
from the
and
bottom.
contracted crews.
Fourth from the bottom.
And is that only Sanitas, or is that other trails too?
No, someone in Trails could speak better to that. I know it's not all Mount Sanitas, but I know a decent amount of it. I want to say probably in the ballpark, we hire ACE each year at about maybe 125,000 each, and they primarily spend their time on Mount Sanitas. So I'd say ballpark, maybe half of that, maybe a little less than half. At least on the capital
The other
side.
the other trail projects that are reflected in that item are,
That I cannot speak to at the moment, but we could find that out.
And I don't know if Jeff or Chad, they might know how we're gonna be utilizing the specific crews that we bring out this season, but.
Yeah, exactly. And Chad Brotherton is here on the meeting this evening. He's our trails manager.
okay, maybe just to speed us along to the next agenda item, maybe you can make a list of these things and just get
Great.
back to us.
Absolutely.
Because there's another item, pardon me, near the end, that's trailhead improvement projects, and I have no idea what's included there either. And I was wondering where the undesignated trail program items were. So if for all three of those, you could give us some sense of
Yeah, the bulk of the capital money.
Where the work is being done.
The bulk of the capital money for trailheads is the South Mesa redo project that we daylighted a couple of months ago to the board. Yeah, okay, and then the last is so trailheads and then
Undesignated.
undesignated, right? And that will be mainly out of operating. We have a couple of staff people that are dedicated to that program, as well as a small crew that's
These are just pointing out the things that we were just discussing about the mix of operating, and so I'm going to leave it at that so that we don't take any more time right now. Pardon me.
Karen, and you add to the list if we're going to get later clarification. I would just like to understand a little bit more what's in the $1 million of the North Sky Trail. Yeah, just if you have any more.
Yeah, it's the final, part of it is for the new the Foothills Trailhead calls for a redesign or a redo. And so it's design work for the Foothills Trailhead. It's restoration at Schneider Draw. We've got a restoration project that is on the agenda for doing restoration on the Schneider aspect. It's the final design and permitting, and it's the construction of the North Sky Trail itself. So those are the various elements that are made up of the North Sky Trail and or North Trail Study Area implementation.
This is just for the 1 year allocation, right?
Yeah, so the construction will probably spill into additional construction will spill into another year.
But as soon as we sign it, but as soon as we sign anything to expend the money, all the money is associated with that particular budget year.
Okay, and so it may not get actually spent in fiscal 23, but that's the construction of the North Sky Trail is at least, budgeted for then.
And encumbered for a contract. And Dan, just so we have 3 trail bridges that are associated with that North Sky Trail. And so those bridges, as you can imagine, they tend to cost quite a bit more than just, cutting tread along the route, the alignment. So those bridges include engineering design, pretty in-depth construction up on the open space. So those bring in some of the larger costs with that project too, Michelle.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I know there'll be some people that are excited about
this. Belong to the next agenda item. So I'm closing this off. And if you have any other questions on the CIP, please email them to staff and we'll hit them next time. Okay.
Yeah, use me as the sync for them and I could get those out to the appropriate staff that would be helpful to be responding.
Great. And now we're going on to RIS and Mo and company.
Well, you stole my thunder. Mo Valenta, our IT senior manager, will be doing a presentation. I believe you all came before us a few years ago when you developed a strategic plan for your particular program area. And tonight you're providing us a status report on where you're at with that plan and to maybe emphasize how you're the underpinnings and the Oz, if you will, the behind the curtain group behind a lot of what we do. So turn it over to John Morley and Mo Valenta.
Could I ask a quick question right before you start? And Mo, in your introduction, would you tell us how many staff there are? I was amazed when I read the memo about how many people.
Absolutely, Karen. You're going to learn all about us.
Great.
So it wouldn't be a presentation without a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hi, good evening. I'm Mo Valenta, and I'm the Resource Information Services Manager for OSMP. And I'm part of a small team that provides the technology support for data and projects and applications that are specific to OSMP operations. RIS is part of the Central Services service area, and as an internal services group, we support many of the master plan strategies that the other work groups are focused on. So anytime you see a graph or a chart or a map or a web application, it's likely we had a hand in that somewhere. The work that we do can be lumped into 3 strategic services: information management and GIS, application support, and administration and technology. And I wanted to pause for a moment and introduce you to the team, because it's really unlikely that your paths are going to cross with them otherwise. So John Morley manages our GIS group. Charlie Philbrick and Kendall Ryan provide GIS services, analysis, and data stewardship. Jennifer Sherry focuses on web maps, web apps, and portals. Harris Callett manages our databases, the scripting, and performs data analysis. And Sarah Hill and Brad Lose provide project management for our tech projects and manage our other internal applications. So together, we bring 135 years of technology experience to OSMP, and many of us also have a background in natural resources. So even though I'm going to be doing most of the talking tonight, these are the folks who actually get the work done. And we're going to be highlighting some of their projects from the last 2 years. So they're here to answer questions for you. And please feel free to geek out with them after the presentation's over. Since 2018, this team has been not only focused on supporting our departmental operations, but also implementing the RIS Strategic Operations Plan. So the plan consists of 20 recommendations, and those recommendations were comprised of 121 separate tasks, and the tasks would fall into 6 categories. So we use those categories to help measure our progress. So completing a task means we get to move the dial in a category. So the overall theme of our plan was to shift from a work group that does it all to a work group that enables all. So it was February 13th of 2020 when RIS provided our first ever update to the Open Space Board. And we were telling you about our strategic operating plan progress to date. And one of the things I said to you that night was we had equipped our conference rooms with technology that allowed for web conferencing, and we had trained staff on how to use it, and it was starting to catch on. Well, that turned out to be pretty timely because 28 days later, we shut the doors to the hub and our lives became virtual. We were all now working from home. And, as a workforce, we had to adapt. But, really for the most part, OSMP was ready. We already had a mobile workforce. We started eliminating desktop computers and cut the cords to landlines when we moved to the hub in 2018. Every standard employee had a laptop and a cell phone, and we had established a SharePoint site so folks could work in the cloud. So, the tech was in place. And I'm not going to pretend it was a completely seamless transition to working from home. There was a lot involved to help folks set up their home offices, get people comfortable with Teams meetings and screen sharing. And for the first 6 months, no, I'm just messing with you. So in addition to supporting staff, we were also using technology to inform the community during lockdown. So we updated our interactive map to highlight the widest trails, so folks could stay farther apart. And we provided visitation information to direct people to maybe some of our less busy trailheads. And we displayed circle hikes, and we suggested one-way loops to, minimize people crossing paths out on the trails. And, the feedback we received was that this was helpful. And since osmptrails.org is second only to the city's main landing page in the number of page views, this is a really good place to focus our efforts. And there were other workflows that we needed to revise as well. Over half the RIS team supports GIS response at the Emergency Operations Center. It's also staffed by county people, county GIS people. This can be really stressful work, particularly during initial response. So I'm super grateful to this group because they're always ready to step up when we get that call that we've been activated. One of the main things we do is update the Office of Emergency Management's public information map. So these maps show information related to the incident, evacuation areas, road closures, shelter information, other pertinent stuff. And Dave, we still print paper maps because sometimes scribbling on a paper map is still the quickest way to get things done. So when COVID hit, we were prepared to respond remotely because we'd already moved our data and workflow up to the cloud. And that was to make response easier because we were a cross-agency team. But Calwood was the first time where we were going to test the process during a real event. And it actually went pretty well. It was the quickest that we were able to spin up the public information map because we didn't have to drive to the EOC. So we just logged in, threw together an ad hoc meeting and got busy. During Calwood, the public information map received 2.3 million hits. Marshall resulted in 4.9 million hits to the public information map. And then RIS also managed the data collection effort for reporting damage on our properties to FEMA. And then NCAR, it was a shorter mobilization, but still 342,000 hits. And because that fire was on our property, our interactive trail map spiked like crazy during that time.
Adjusting our workflows to support remote work wasn't just important for the EOC. We also needed to make adjustments to support our regular staff's use of GIS, which is normally data and graphics heavy and doesn't always perform great when working outside the office, where OSMP staff's connections to city servers can be pretty variable. RIS stepped up to help improve remote workflows by reconfiguring our data and services, creating additional web resources for quick access, and then setting up users up to access and more effectively use remote virtual desktops for when they needed to get in and do heavier work. With creating additional web resources for our staff, we also assisted in taking some of our normal public engagements to a virtual format. As an alternative to our normal in-person trail and ecology open houses, and to update the public on our master plan progress, RIS worked with staff from across the department to create a web page highlighting some of our past and upcoming work, including an interactive project map. The number of site views far exceeded our normal in-person attendance, and we're planning to continue offering an online option. Chad will be giving a deeper background on the evolution of the open house and a little preview of that map later on. One of the other impacts of COVID was staffing across the city. A citywide hiring freeze in 2020 led to IT pausing the rehire of a central GIS enterprise administrator. GIS staff from OSMP, IT, and planning and development formed an interim GIS administration team to prioritize and collaborate on common GIS issues and needs across the city of Boulder. Through OSMP's leadership on the GIS administration team, we've helped to ensure that citywide licensing, purchases, and maintenance of infrastructure and processes that support GIS are optimal to support the work of OSMP. The last time we presented, we'd also recently completed a mobile action plan where we assessed our current data collection efforts and methods, the needs of our users, and technology available to create a plan of how we could improve. We're happy to report that we've made significant progress towards implementing that plan. Mobile technology continues offering new opportunities to improve business processes and service levels. We've updated our workflows to allow data to move freely from field to office and back from the office to the field. Equipping our workforce with mobile maps and data collection apps has reduced our paperwork and duplicate data entry while optimizing resource allocation. Key aspects of these improvements include moving away from dedicated data collection hardware to a bring your own device approach, where we use existing smartphones to meet our staff's needs. For higher accuracy work, supplementary antennas and receivers allow staff to choose what equipment and workflows meet their requirements. Staff are able to collect and edit live data directly from the field or cache data to work offline in rugged areas and sync when the connectivity is available again. We've moved many of our over 30 ongoing data collection and visualization efforts to a web platform, which provides near real-time feedback and access from almost anywhere on almost any device. And along with our updates to other data collection methods, the Rangers needed an updated solution to track their patrols and contacts, streamline data entry, and make it easier to view and report on that data. Raptor, short for Ranger Patrol Capture, is a mobile digital patrol log system that allows Rangers to track their daily activities on the OSBT system. Using their phones, Rangers collect data on their patrol routes, the number and types of visitor contacts, and their enforcement actions. The system seamlessly integrates two commercial off-the-shelf mobile applications, Quick Capture and Survey 123. Rangers are now able to visualize this dynamic patrol data using an ArcGIS dashboard and use the data collected to inform their operations. Raptor improves over prior efforts by bringing data entry to the field and reduces the work required of Rangers in the office to enter their logs, while adding specific spatial locations, which can be used to quickly visualize issues within areas or identify hotspots to inform Ranger strategic operations. Over the next 2 years, RAS will support multiple priority Ranger technology projects, including a state-mandated body-worn camera initiative, along with the launch of an associated evidence management and records management software.
So each time we deploy one of these apps, we're creating data. OSMP manages hundreds of data sets. We have web mapping applications, story maps, dashboards, and we use all this information to provide analysis and help make decisions, create reports. And much of this information is available via the city's website and on the open data portal, but others are primarily for internal staff use. This working data, it informs projects or serves as the basis for data collection. And you've seen much of this in the packets that you receive and the presentations. In 2021, RIS started focusing on aggregating these data sets and the maps and the data collection apps under a single secured internal website that we currently refer to as our internal data portal. RIS met with each of the 26 programs in OSMP and created a landing page for each of these groups. The goal is for each program to use their page to share or quickly access need to know information and maps. And the basic content of each page includes these 8 sections. One of the things that's going to appear on the RIS page is our master layer list. Now, we could have just dumped our list of databases out to a spreadsheet and shared it with the department, but we took it one step farther and we created an interactive master layer dashboard. So this is a at-a-glance summary of each of OSMP's managed GIS data sets. The tool provides the general status of the data set. It's searchable and filterable, and it also provides links to locations of data that may be published up to ArcGIS Online. And then when you select a data set, the summary and description information for that specific layer also appears in the dashboard. So to date, nearly 300 data sets, documents, and maps have been loaded up to the internal data portal. This one-stop shop for staff to access our working data is scheduled to launch on June 1st this year. So all this GIS data serves as the foundation for OSMP's asset management solution, Beehive. So 10 programs are currently using Beehive to track and schedule daily operations or manage their assets or record maintenance logs. And we have a goal to add 5 more this year: forestry, historic facilities, IPM, agro-eco, and properties. So in Beehive, we can track the planned work as well as the details and costs of the completed work. And then we can then use that data in Beehive to provide estimates for work planning and budgeting for similar projects in out years. Once the data is entered in Beehive, we can then pull it back into GIS and create dashboards that provide a quick status on how we're doing on the work projects. So by now you're seeing a trend. It's all about mobile and web maps and portals and dashboards. Really, people just want to be able to find information quickly and easily. So in 2020, the city began a year-long refresh of our website. The new website won 2 awards. It's focused on the user experience and their needs. So we took the content and detached it from the departmental silos that the old website used and grouped it by content type instead. So this helped it make information easier for people to find and provides a better user interface. But RIS took this opportunity to update our web content, and we built 264 new pages in the updated website. Our managed pages received over 500,000 page views since the launch, with Trail and Trailheads accounting for over half of that. 148 pages were created for Trail and Trailheads alone. We gathered data and photos and content from work groups all across the department. The new site includes trail difficulty, mileage, total elevation, allowed uses, and you can also filter on that information now if you want to use it to plan your trip. These pages they're also fully integrated with our interactive web map. So if you click on the View Trail Map button, you're automatically zoomed to that trailhead on the interactive map, and vice versa. If you click on the More Info link on the interactive map, that'll bring you back to the related trailhead. Similarly, closure information from the web map also updates the status field on the web page. So this integration keeps us tightly synchronized, and it helps us provide the same reliable information on either site. So projects like updating OSMP's web pages, deployment of Beehive, managing open data portals, these are all large initiatives that OSMP collaborates with other departments on. In 2021, RAS participated in a 5-month planning process called Design the Future. And we worked alongside representatives from IT and 10 other departments. So this team was tasked with describing what data nirvana could look like at the city of Boulder. So we outlined the challenges that we faced around data management and GIS, and then we supplied solutions for those challenges. So each one of the representatives solicited feedback from staff, and then we converted this citywide feedback into 21 recommendations that we would use to inform future citywide data and GIS actions. The recommendations fell into these categories: governance, roles and responsibilities, standards, process and procedures, and data-driven decision-making. During the process, the Design the Future team presented ideas and brainstormed with executive leadership at various milestones throughout the project. The end product included this prioritized 4-year implementation timeline, and this was ratified by the city manager and all the city directors in May of 2021. The implementation of this recommendation it's the responsibility of the IT department and their data and analytics team. The Design the Future group is going to support that, but we've also formed a data advisory committee to help with that. So being part of that team was critical for OSMP. It helped ensure that we could have continued collaboration with IT, but also alignment with our RIS strategic operating plan, because that was already well underway. So how are we doing on our plan? The SOP set some pretty high goals for our team, and we often revisit it to identify how far we've come or where we need to continue to focus our efforts. These dials were part of the original 2018 plan. The dark portion highlights where we were at our assessment in 2018. And the lighter green is the progress that we've estimated based on completing tasks in each one of the categories through the end of 2021. So what we presented tonight are just some highlights of the work we've accomplished. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more foundational and really not necessarily very fun work that needs to be in place to pull all of these things together. So what's next for us? Well, we've been back in the office for a full week now. And once again, we're adapting. RIS has trained staff on how to manage now what a hybrid meeting looks like in a Teams conference room. We've refreshed their memory on the tech in the large community rooms. We've provided equipment so they can be productive, whether they're working from home or at the hub, or really any of the touchdown spaces around the city. And, like working from home, folks are still getting kind of used to these things, but, it'll become second nature. And I think we'll be able to settle into hybrid working too. For the rest of this year, we're going to continue to keep plugging away at our SOP. We still have specific tasks from our action plans that we need to tackle. We're going to keep building out the internal data portal and Beehive. And we've got some foundational work to complete, documenting processes and workflows and everyone's favorite metadata. Of course, we still have to maintain the things we built and support the 110 projects that we were tagged on in the 22 work plan. So technology keeps evolving, and it's really important for us to keep up. We want to stay in a place of being proactive instead of reactive. So towards the end of this year, we're going to create a scope of work to renew our SOP with the intention of completing the updated plan in 2023. So I hope I've managed to provide just a little glimpse into the teamwork that's required to support the internal workflows at OSMP. It really does take a village, and Karen, here's the village. Thanks for your attention, and what questions do you guys have for us?
Well, it seems to me that the 8 people who are the service, not only for OSMP, but providing service for extended operations within the city, deserve some kind of a Medal of Valor for all that we've been through in the last few years.
Karen, I don't know if you could see my hand. I just didn't want to interrupt.
I can't see anybody's hand. Can somebody switch the
let me stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
You bet. Sorry about
that. Needed. Thanks.
Yeah.
Caroline, go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Mo, for that presentation. I think that the city's new website is so good. And I think that the OSMP portion and the science portion and all of it was so good. I was like getting emails during the updating process, asking me for surveys and stuff. And I was happy to do it because it was just such a nice website to visit. So thank you for all of your hard work with that. Just like a quick clarifying question, and then I'll let someone else go, and I might have a couple more. At the end, did you say renewing the SOP as in we're creating a completely new one? And I'm so sorry if I missed something very obvious, but is that what you were stating at the end?
Caroline, it's just going to be an update to the plan. Some of the things we've completed, we created this in 2018. There's things have changed. Software has changed. The way we collect data has changed. So we just want to freshen it up in 2023. So I don't expect it to be a whole new thing, but I do want to get an update and a new direction. We've crossed some things off the list. Let's throw some new stuff in there and get it prioritized and keep moving forward. We really need to keep up with technology because it's what allowed us to make this jump to work from home when others might have struggled a little bit because they weren't really ready for that. Well, none of us were ready for that, but we were prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the layering and stuff that you did with the maps and stuff is just so good. So good. So thank you.
Dave? You're still muted.
Let me start over. Thanks, you guys. That was very helpful and instructive and inspiring, actually, for all the years that we've been at this. My question relates to the proverbial and infamous data backlog. Are you guys kind of instrumental in assessing and working on that, or how are those data that we've collected, that have been collected over the years, that are still not, inputted and analyzed, how are those being handled?
Can you give us an example of the kind of data that you're thinking of?
Well, all the monitoring that has occurred, and more recently, I'm sure is up to date. It's the monitoring and information that was collected earlier on in the program that either has sat in people's files or on shelves or in drawers or wherever, and that's what I'm concerned about, because as we've talked all along, trends are extremely important, and I think that some, if not many, of those data would be very helpful in determining a number of trends that we're interested in observing.
So I think what you're talking about is primarily natural resource data, right?
Yeah, visitation data though as well, and so yeah, whatever data that's out there that's still is still out there. Kind of what is its status and how are we dealing with it?
Let me start to answer that, Dan, and then, or Dave, and then, Harris and Brian could jump in. We've been doing a lot of work. That's the not fun stuff I was referring to, data cleanup and trying to manage these monitoring efforts that you're right, we're like in boxes under people's desks or in spreadsheets that we need to incorporate into our databases. And Harris has been working tirelessly to sort of tease that out and work with the data collectors to get it into our production databases. Our master layer list really shows us where we need to do some work. And again, that was a project that Harris brought forward for us. I'm going to let them talk about that some more.
Sure. So the SOP list.
Can't hear you very well.
Yeah, Harris, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, sorry.
Data malfunction.
Let's start to talk louder. How's this?
It's a little bit better.
Okay, I apologize for the low volume. So the 2018 SOP contained a list of data sets that were not yet in our databases. So these are either in Excel or on paper. So that was an inventory of them. It wasn't necessarily complete. And if there are more data sets out there, then that's something that we would want to know about. So it's something that we're keeping an eye open for. When it comes to these data sets, importing them into a more modern format is time consuming, but it's something that we've been chipping away at over the past several years. Just this year, there will be 2 such data sets entering the databases and being modernized. So we're making progress on these, but there's more work to be done. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, Harris, just we're having a really difficult time hearing you. So maybe we'll turn things over to Brian just for a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else you could try with your voice. And we'll see if you can jump in a second. If we can't, then we could perhaps follow up Mo on some of the things, information that Harris may have, and we can maybe do it in written format. But Brian, is there anything that you might want to respond in that to Dave?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dave. And Mo, great presentation. Let's see, I think we've been trying to get better at solving the data backlog or reducing the data backlog. We've been trying to bring a lot more data forward into OSBT meetings. I'm thinking about the tallgrass data we presented for the NCAR fire science updates that I give each year. Of course, the master plan had a bunch of information we were able to put together for both the system overview report and the master plan. So those were just opportunities to get data analyzed and get it presented. Visitation data, of course, we have the Visitation Data Explorer, which is popular and gives you pretty much real-time information on visitation counts across the system. And then I guess what I would add to that is we have an internal science team that's functioning, that's cross-functional, members from a lot of different work groups, including Mo's. And in 2021, we completed an internal report on science project assessment, where we looked at the 30 ongoing monitoring projects and looked at all the components of the context of why we're doing them, what the methods are like, what the results are showing us, and kind of wrap that up in terms of an impact score for each of those projects, and began a conversation in the science team about how we might connect some dots and resolve any deficiencies that the report uncovered. One of them is exactly the thing you discussed, which is that we feel good that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We feel like our methods are really sound, that the data we're getting is really good, but there is some roadblocking between the data collection through to the analysis and reporting. And so we're still kind of working on best practices to reduce that backlog. Some approaches include having some best management practices for setting out your reporting expectations at the beginning of the project. Not only what kind of reports you're going to issue, but what kind of analysis you're going to do, so that when you get to the point where you have the data, it's more of a plug and play instead of a feeling of trying to figure out how to analyze the information and make sense of it. Working on what are the minimum requirements for any given monitoring project in terms of its reporting styles and reporting intervals. And then another concept we've been developing is data science sprints, which a lot of what we were hearing from project managers is that it's difficult to protect their time to do the work of analysis and reporting, because we have so many other priorities in the department for our subject matter experts to work on. So a data science sprint then is something you can put on the calendar, treat it as an out of office type of work block. It can be up to a week or 2 weeks long. And then you would get support from myself, folks in Mo's group, and a couple other data nerds in the department to do some, thinking about what kind of analysis you want to accomplish in that time constrained approach, doing regular check-ins during the 1 or 2 week period, and then figuring out what those report expectations look like. So a dedicated time to do focus work on one thing at a time, and hopefully produce those reports to help solve that backlog. So there's a couple of things off the top of my head. I'm probably leaving some things out, so if others want to add in, and I'd be happy to hear it.
Am I missing something on page 6? I really like the master layer list chart that's there, but it seems to me that natural resources are not included on that master layer list. Am I missing something?
Yeah, Karen, that's just a screenshot of what really is a much longer scrollable list. I just wanted to take a snapshot in time so you had an idea of what that looked like. And I'll be honest, I took a snapshot of a good part.
So there are items for natural resource data sets also.
Absolutely.
Great.
So I still had a follow-up question, both Brian and Mo. So similar to trail maintenance backlog, are we expecting that we're ever going to catch up?
per data reporting backlog?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't really pondered whether there's a day when we're caught up. I'm hoping that all the new projects we're taking on for new data collection will start off with a strong foundation of expectation, and so they won't create new backlog, and that we can then be chipping away at the longer legacy projects. They are time consuming, as I've been involved in a few projects with 10, 20-year data sets. They're complicated because there's a lot moving across those time windows, and to get them right, it's not as easy as sitting down for an afternoon and coming up with an answer. But I'm confident that as long as we're not adding new data collection that creates additional burden that we can't quite meet, and we can keep with those projects up to date, that we can chip away. I don't know that it's an urgent priority for the department to solve the backlog, because we are feeling confident that we are able to produce the information we need to make decisions, but also do some reporting. As we pull together a system overview report, I think we were pretty happy with the way that came about and was able to describe the status of the system. And then, if we want to look at 25 years of tall grass state natural area data, great if we can get it out tomorrow, but if it has to wait until December or one year from today, it's, that's not going to be as big of a priority as some of the other more emergent needs.
And aside from the reporting piece, Dave, there's things in paper files under people's desks or spreadsheets on their hard drives, that I can guarantee you is not going to happen anymore. Mostly through the work of Charlie and Kendall, who have been building mobile applications. So it's going right from their cell phone into a database. Now, is the data perfect? No. Do we have a data cleanup backlog? Yes. And as the entire team is also trying to chip away at that. So when you look at the master layer list and you see things that are red on there, we know that that needs some attention. And depending on the priority of the data set, those are the ones we're going to focus on.
Great, thanks.
I think it's important for all of us to articulate the fact that what you've repeatedly said in your report, Mo, about how this information that you work on can and should and does inform decision-making is really an important aspect of what you do and what you provide to the department. And in that sense, I believe it's important for all of us, including the board and the public, to have access to the data that can inform decision-making, not just the staff.
Yes.
John, you had a question.
Yes, I actually have like a million questions. I could sit here all night. I actually really enjoyed reading
about
the
5
report
minutes.
and the presentation. Okay.
We have
I've
about
narrowed
5
it
minutes
down
more
to
for
just
this
a
segment.
couple. It was really impressive to see what you all have done, as such a small team. Are you all developing a lot of these applications, custom in-house? Are you using a lot of off-the-shelf solutions?
Our goal, John, is to try to use as many off-the-shelf solutions as we can. But, Charlie and Kendall and Jen, they do configurations of that, or they do integrations. Like Kendall could speak to the Raptor application, which is really a number of commercial off-the-shelf things mashed together into a really slick mobile app.
Yeah, so both the products use the Quick Caption Survey 1, 2, 3 are all Esri products, and but there's customization within that, but the product itself is is out of the box, specific customizations to work better for the work groups and for the workflows. And then that information to be able to use it for visualization and reporting feeds directly into Dashboard, which is another off-the-shelf, commercial off-the-shelf product. Again, with just some customizations with some programming and things on the back, but.
That's fantastic. to piggyback on what Karen was saying about open data, I love the Data Explorer website. I got lost on there for about an hour just looking at all the data that was available. But one thing I did notice is that there wasn't like a button for me to download a CSV of that data or, you know, JSON of that data that was there. Was that an intentional choice to not kind of make that more accessible? Obviously, someone could manually scrape that data or key it in, but I wasn't sure if that was an intentional choice or not.
John, are you referring to the open data portal or
The open data portal? Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think Jen had a large hand in building that site before we handed it off to IT, so she could probably speak to.
Hi.
Hi, Jen.
Okay, just making sure I'm on. I did, and that's interesting because I was just working with somebody at ESRI that creates the software. A few weeks ago, he had noticed that there was an issue downloading a specific shapefile. So I will have to say I don't know at the moment, but I believe we do have that functionality in place. It's not intentionally hidden from you because it wouldn't be very useful to you otherwise. So I can double check and follow up and let you know how to go about doing that. It's probably just a matter of continuing to click until you find it. I don't think there's time for me to demonstrate that here, but I can follow up.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd be curious. I poked at it for a bit and couldn't find it, but I felt like it was there somewhere because all the data was rendered and it's like, it was so close to me, but I couldn't get at it.
Yes, you should be able, otherwise it would not be very useful for us to have an open data site where you could only look at the data.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. That it, John?
That's it.
Great. One quick question from me. Is it still best to search using Google to find where to go on the website, or is there some place within the OSMP pages where I can search?
Sarah, do you want to take that one? Are you out there?
I'm here, Mo. Yeah, so Google is great. Definitely works well. The city's new website does have a really good search now. I know our past one, that was kind of the top complaint by a mile, that the search was not very good. This one is quite good. Some people do have trouble finding it though.
Okay, so if I have trouble finding it, who should I contact? How can I learn about that?
So the search, if you want me to share my screen, I can show you where it's at really quick.
I'd rather contact you individually.
Okay. But anyway, it's way up at the top of this website. There's like a calendar, jobs, contact us. And then part of why it's hard to find, and we've asked to maybe clarify this, but it's a magnifying little icon instead of the word search. But if you click on that, that is the internal, like just to the city website search rather than Google.
Okay.
And this one does work a lot better than the previous website. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will be in touch.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other final quick questions? We're at time. Dave?
Dan, I have a quick question for you. In all the work that this group is doing for other city departments, is that being factored into the cost allocation conversation?
Well, I would say that the work that we would be involved in and working together with our colleagues over on IT. So GIS is a huge citywide program, but between utilities and open space, we're probably the two largest entities or users on that. So we get involved when there's citywide decision-making based on decisions that could impact our department. So our collaboration is typically around those areas in which we have a lot at stake of what decisions are being made. So we will participate in citywide GIS conversations and policy development and protocols and you know how this work is being carried out, because between us and utilities, we're going to be the most impacted. Same with the EOC and our role on citywide. It's like a lot of the times participating in the EOC is we're either adjacent to or the epicenter of disaster management. So I would say that to me, our cooperation and collaboration makes total integrated sense. But as far as like, are we tracking an hour that we give toward a citywide project that has an OSMP element and trying to parse that out from a cost allocation standpoint? I don't think so. But Lauren, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the cost allocation formulas go to that level of detail.
That's correct. Yeah, it's by strategic service. So I would say within IT, the GIS charges are more around like our share of licensing for access to software and things like that. So I think there's one central GIS admin and maybe one other employee, but their time goes to those other city departments that don't have embedded GIS staff. So of all of our IT cost allocation, I would say that's a very, very small element. It's more, we'll talk about it in July too, but the biggest share is really around like hardware, like computer replacement funding, licenses, Office 365 licenses and all of that. So GIS, we could find out what the line item detail is there, but it will be very small relative to the other elements of IT cost allocation.
Okay, so open space isn't really underwriting, any partial position or anything like that as far as assistance to the department.
Yeah, I would say they've had a vacancy. So it was wrapped up in that citywide hiring freeze. So they had a vacant GIS position and were not able to refill it the same way we weren't able to refill our vacancies. And so a lot of that interim work John was speaking to was a bunch of folks pitching in and stepping up. But the reverse is probably true in other areas of our business. Like if we're short staffed, we're calling them for help on other things. So I don't think, I wouldn't say we're underwriting anything in the GIS space for IT.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I'll mention that they filled that position now, so
yeah,
we're off the hook.
All right, a round of applause for RIS and Mo and the whole team.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mo. Karen, I think we'll carry on to the last formal agenda item, and my voice is trailing. You might notice I feel like I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. So hopefully I've got a little bit of a kickoff presentation here. So hopefully it lasts a little bit. We have our presentation next is going to be divided into sort of two parts. One is to sort of provide some emphasis to the memo of the over some highlights from 2021 and speaking to some emphasis in 2020 or 2022 areas of the master plan implementation. And then the second half was going to be more of the interactive map. So to give members of the public and the board a little tutorial of where you can find a lot more project detail on projects that are significant for master plan implementation. So we do have a little bit of a PowerPoint, and I'm going to be sharing this presentation with our deputies. And then the second half of the presentation is going to be Chad Brotherton is going to walk us through the interactive map that we sometimes have referred to in the past 2 years as our virtual open house. So let's bring up that PowerPoint. We can move right into going to the next slide. Thank you. So I sort of gave this a little bit of this opening at the very beginning of the kicking off matters from the department. And that is to emphasize that, so we want to, as a department, utilize various tools, various strategies in order to kind of keep the master plan alive in the public's eyes and the board eyes. And to also, of course, we're living and breathing this almost every day through our work planning process, which is a year-long process, and through budget development. But really this is one particular tool is to sort of provide an annual highlights, if you will, in order to kind of keep it alive. I've referred to it at a number of times, all the various ways that we tend to try to do that as well in various ways through board meetings. And the interactive map, of course, is another particular strategy. And there's other ones as well. And so this highlight report in and of itself is not to be construed as an exhaustive list of everything we do. It's one tool of many as a ways to kind of hit the master plan pretty consistently throughout the year. So if we can go to the next slide. So one of the big keys of other opportunities to learn about the master plan is through the budget development. And that's why we kind of paired these together, because a lot of the charts and figures and graphs that you see in our budget reports has to do with how we're linking directly to the master plan. So the CIP budget had a number of different elements to it in terms of how it links to particular strategies, how it links to particular focus areas. Obviously, there's opportunities at board meetings through setting the agenda in terms of our retreats, our regular meetings, our field trips, in which we're trying to bring programs alive and project updates alive, and how those are linked to master plans. Of course, we have continual media and community outreach, our upgraded and enhanced field notes. E-newsletter goes out monthly. We commented on a number of web pages. In fact, we just built a lot of new web pages around wildfire and response, press releases. A lot of times these are related to specific projects and strategies of the master plan. And of course, again, we'll hit on that community virtual open house in just a few minutes. So those are other opportunities that we try to purposely keep the master plan alive and in people's eyes, if you will. Next slide, please. So just a quick summary. I know that most of you are very, very familiar with this, so I'll spend 30 seconds on it. But starting off, we did create a system overview report, about a 200-page document that sort of tries to give us a state of the system as we felt it existed going into the master plan development stage. We then had a process committee that helped staff talk about how the community will be engaged, how board will be engaged, how the council will be engaged, and the plan was adopted in September of 2019. We have 5 focus areas. Each focus area has a number of outcomes that we are hoping to see out on the system at the end of this 10, we said basically it's a 10 to 50 year horizon. And then we have 46 strategies, and most of those have been tiered into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, tier 1 being the most important. Next slide. And my last slide is just going to be talking a little bit about the connection between funding and the master plan. So we have 3 levels of funding that could be available to us at any given year during master plan implementation. For our first couple of years, we are operating under the constrained, what we view as a constrained version due to budget cuts and furloughs and response to COVID. We are now moving into, I think Sam described it well, more into a restored budget. We had one of our sales tax that was renewed. We have the cuts that were from COVID that have been restored. And then the other scenario that the master plan envisioned could be a full funding scenario. And we are not there yet in terms of moving even beyond the restoration of a restored budget. In 2020 and 2021, budget and work plan developed and constrained, as I mentioned before, and now we're moving into a fully restored budget and implementing one of the sales tax, 0.15 sales tax that got renewed in the same year that the budget was approved, or master plan was approved. So our next slides are going to be focusing more on the 5 focus areas, and each deputy is going to take at least one, and a few deputies will take multiple, a couple of different focus areas to provide some highlights from 2021, and also to provide some fun facts, and to also take a peek into some interesting things that are going to be happening this year. So if we can go to the next slide. We're going to start off with ecosystem health and resilience, and we'll bring on John Potter, Deputy of Resource and Stewardship, and sort of the manager of this particular part of our master plan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk about ecosystem health and resilience focus area first. And in this focus area, we have 4 main outcomes in the master plan that we're going for. And those are a high diversity of native plants and animals, restored and resilient habitat system-wide, climate action, and informed shared stewardship. And so those are that's what staff are focused on for their projects. And really looking back at 2021, kind of pulled out this fun fact that we removed a lot of cattail from open space ponds last year to restore habitat for native amphibians. Wildlife staff coordinated with veg management staff to remove a 13-ton cattail mat from a spring near the junction of Mesa and Big Blue Stem West to open up water and improve habitat condition there. They worked with junior rangers to remove cattails from the Church East Pond. And they also worked with the Ready to Work crews for 3 days and removed over 14 tons of cattail at the Shanahan Ranch and Anderson Ponds, specifically there to improve habitat for northern leopard frog pictured here, which is a tier 1 conservation species for the state. All this good work on the ponds is paying off, and we're seeing this species at more and more sites across the system, which is really great progress. Some highlights for ecosystem health and resilience in 2021. Just wanted to talk about a few projects. We have many great projects last year for ecosystem health, as we do every year. We had about 72 projects with a primary goal of ecosystem health, but maybe 3 that jump out are these 3. First, staff's rapid response to the discovery of invasive New Zealand mud snail in South Boulder Creek. A staff team proposal for system-wide management of the species was accepted by the department in March, and implementation really started soon after that with closing stream access and restoring riparian habitat at South Mesa Trailhead. We installed new fencing and implemented a regulatory closure, installed new signs, conducted in-person outreach, mailed out a bunch of educational materials to nearby residents and user groups, and increased enforcement efforts. So that was our response to New Zealand mud snail. Second highlight, we got 50 head of cattle up on all 500 acres of the tall oak grass containment zone up on Shanahan Ridge. The Shanahan grazing was successful with approximately 50 head grazing the 4 new units that we had fenced in up there between mid-April and early June of last year. Vegetation monitoring and photo point monitoring within those grazing units was also completed in late summer to track the success of the project. And that informed a presentation that Chris Warner gave you recently on the NCAR fire, and it kind of showed us really well what the reduction in fuel height there as a result of this grazing has done. We also, on tall oak grass though, last year we did spot treatments in a number of areas across the system, and put up a new fence on the DeLear property south of El Dorado Springs Drive for an additional 20 acres of grazing that we hope to do there on a dense patch in that location. Finally, third highlight, I think if you look back on the whole year and what we got done in this focus area, I think it's important to note that a total of 140 acres of forest land were thinned during the 21 season in Shanahan Ridge and Sunshine project areas. 240 trailer loads of logs were moved out over the course of the year. And staff were also successful in getting fuel mitigation grants to help fund many of those activities. Looking forward in this focus area, upcoming this year, again, a lot going on. But perhaps a really significant new area is the expanded climate action work that we're doing. And this includes work on a long-term carbon inventory and developing natural climate solutions for the OSMP system specifically. While this work's likely to continue on into 2023 as well, we're getting started on a system-wide baseline inventory of above and below ground carbon stocks, hopefully at a scale that can be used to understand climate action improvements gained through our soil health and vegetation management activities over the years to come. Moving on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about agriculture and the agriculture focus area in the master plan. And in that focus area, we have 7 outcomes that we're going for, as you'll recall. And those are things like viable agricultural livelihoods, sustainable productive agriculture. We're trying to diversify agricultural products for local markets. We also have a high value habitat on ranches and farms as an outcome that we're going for, as well as soil health and resilience, resilient and efficient water supply, and appreciation for working landscapes. So those are the things that staff are focused on for agriculture. And the fun fact that we pulled out for this area of work was around the field lateral ditches. And last year we were able to do burns on about 8,900 feet of those field laterals and that was done by OSMP staff as well as Boulder Fire Wildland Division. We work closely with on that. This occurred at 3 properties, including 63rd Street Farm and IBM. We really had a goal of burning laterals at 5 properties in 21, but with the abnormally wet spring and a record dry fall, we only got 3 burn days in that were possible, but I was glad to see that they did get some done there. We had 32 major agricultural related projects last year, but I'll draw attention to 3 of those. First of all, the Ertl House, farmhouse in the eastern part of the system is now complete and occupied by agricultural tenants. The house had been unoccupied for a number of years, and it really required a great deal of work, including hazardous material mitigation for asbestos and lead, relocation of a staircase to get code compliant on access in the house, a new HVAC system and fully insulating the house. We replaced the historic windows and repaired those and got them operable and energy efficient. And we also fixed exterior wood that had been damaged over the years by age and weather. And we got that all painted up nice and you know, among a number of other important rehab projects that were part of that renovation. The tenants are part of OSMP's agricultural program and take care of the cattle and the land where the house stands. A second highlight that I wanted to mention was that we, the water resource staff worked with a consultant last year to develop a number of new tools and improve existing tools to better track our ditch water rights and to be able to assess water allocations across the fields on the system. We've been using these tools consistently for decision support, and this continually needs to be updated moving forward. And we'd also like to include other water assets in future phases, but really they made great strides on understanding our water rights last year. The third highlight I felt was important to mention was that we installed the necessary prairie dog barriers to remove prairie dogs by lethal methods from 94 acres. And we relocated prairie dogs from an additional 46 acres of irrigated agricultural land on Cowles, Axelson, Coot Lake, Hester, Ditzel, Lewisburg, Gallagher, and New West properties. So we're making really good strides, and I know staff are excited to show you that in the field coming up on the 25th. We also did compost applications, field leveling, and cover crop seeding on fields where the prairie dogs had been removed last year. And prairie dog colony mapping was completed in September, early November. And that documented a 7.1% decrease in active prairie dog acres from 2020 to 2021. And staff put together a nice annual prairie dog public meeting in December as well, which we've reported to you on. Looking at upcoming projects, I wanted to mention a new effort around baling twine that the ag staff developed and are working on. So OSMP leases several thousand acres for agricultural hay production, and baling twine and mesh are incorporated as part of the baling process. And it's a difficult material to dispose of for the agricultural community and can cause conflict with wildlife and livestock. So staff have been facilitating twine collection this year to reduce the waste stream and send more to recycling, and also to reduce accumulation of that polypropylene, that bright orange polypropylene material. You've probably seen it. Really trying to reduce that accumulation on OSMP properties and to reduce the risk to wildlife. The material can get bound up in the feet of osprey and other raptors, and adult osprey and chicks that get tangled in baling twine can get trapped in their nest or lose toes or even limbs when it cuts off their circulation. So staff began outreach throughout the winter and during the bulk of hay feeding season this past winter, and tenants have been extremely receptive and seeing the benefit to the program because they've always kind of dealt with this challenge of disposing twine. And we're thinking we may reach a total of about a ton of material collected this year, which is great. And this is really an example of a pilot program that's part of our reaching our desired outcome for high value habitat on ranches and farms. So with that, I'll wrap up that quick summary of ecosystem health and agriculture focus areas, and I'll turn it over to Jeff Haley for the next one.
Thanks, John. Again, Jeff Haley, Deputy Director for Trails and Facilities. And Leah, yeah, so the next focus area, we talked a bit about this earlier in the budget discussion, but it's really our focus on responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment. And it's really looking at the fact that we're reunited by our connection to and enjoyment of nature and our obligation to protect it. So most of the initiatives and strategies within this focus area really are the staff and the community's response to how do we really take care of our lands, but also recognize the visitation and create those experiences that will inspire and provide physical and mental well-being, and just overall create new stewards of our lands for future generations. So these projects, or I should say these outcomes, similar to what John mentioned for the other focus areas, we're really hoping to see outcomes that look at a diverse range of recreational experiences. We want folks to have enjoyable, responsible recreation within open space and mountain parks. We want welcoming, accessible trailheads, great experiences for all in terms of reducing conflict and providing equitable experiences across the system. And finally, a high quality trail network. And again, just to refer back to our overall theme this evening is how do we provide funding and do those projects that really meet the goals of the community in this focus area. And similar to what we've been mentioning in the other focus areas, just a fun fact. Again, the Anemone Trail, which was recently constructed and finalized this year, has been a huge project for our department and the community. Again, it's about a little over 3 mile loop. And the great thing about that is we've been able to reduce or close about 5 miles of undesignated trails in that region. So again, by providing that new planned sustainable trail, we're now able to protect the resource and really support high quality ecological values up there. But if anybody's wanting to get some good exercise and get in shape, you can always come along and help out on our trail projects. You can see here our trail workers that were on that project, the average distance hiked was about 608 miles. So in comparison, that's about 28% of the AT, the Appalachian Trail. And maybe even more fantastic than that is the average elevation gain that each trail worker climbed as they worked on that corridor throughout the project was about 133,000 vertical feet. So imagine climbing Everest about 4.5 times is what that's looking at. So some fun facts there just about how that project went. And again, back to the overall theme of how that trail really provides that responsible recreation and stewardship. So the next slide will indicate just a little bit about 2021. So what did we really accomplish and what are those highlights from last season? Again, it's really looking at the infrastructure and our operations and programming that we use to understand visitation, to support those visitor experiences, to reinforce those great experiences for all as they visit the system. And again, providing that safety and stewardship of the ecological values. So trail maintenance, obviously, we've mentioned that this evening. Last year alone, we had about 1,500 drainage structures that we were cleaning and repairing just through routine maintenance. We had about 3.5 miles of trail surface specifically that we repaired with about 400 timber steps. We had about 780 rock steps, and our staff built about 4,500 square feet of retaining wall. So a lot of work just in the trail maintenance category. Again, we'll come back next month, as we mentioned earlier, and talk more about trail maintenance. And again, the trailheads. So those areas that we have set up for folks to access our system. Each week we do major trailhead maintenance where we go to different ones and rebuild, regrade. And it's really looking at what is the environmental sustainability of those. Do we need to address stormwater management? Is there issues with accessibility? Are folks not able to access them? So we're always working on trailheads each year as well. That includes wayfinding signage. And some of our more programmatic areas, of course, our Junior Rangers, which is our premier legacy program. Last year alone, they built about 54 feet of raised wooden trail. If you've been out to the Springbrook and the Marshall Mesa area and seen that. And also repaired about almost 700 feet of tread, which is just the trail surface in that area. And specifically on Springbrook, about 2,000 feet of trail that they worked on there. So again, wonderful program that's engaging our youth and looking at future stewards of our system and really getting them out on the system in a great way. In fact, starting to begin this summer as well. Monitoring, I believe it was last month or recently you've heard from Colin in our Human Dimensions program about all the monitoring of visitation. So as he recalled last year, we had about 5 additional long-term and 90 short-term visitor counters. That's how we capture all that data that Colin was able to inform the board and our community about where we're seeing visitation. Again, that allows us to really look at that responsible recreation and our users and those trends over time that we just talked about with our information staff as well. And then finally, just wanted to highlight our visitor survey, not only the sheer data of who's coming in and how and when, but really looking at the public opinion and that experience. So again, our outcomes that we want to solve and really focus on with this area is understanding the visitor experience and all of our visitors throughout our community, no matter how they interact and how they enjoy, what are those perceptions and opinions that we can learn from. So I think my final slide here, I'll talk just a moment about our 22 highlights. I won't go through these projects in great detail, but again, here's just a sampling of work that's happening now. You can see in these images, again, how this trail work, these projects really build stewardship and really ownership of our system and giving back. So North Sky, we talked a bit about that already. We are actively designing, planning that work, going through the permitting process, all that to get us to the point as which we can construct and start building that trail next year that we talked about earlier. South Mesa, we also mentioned through our trailhead improvements. And again, as John talked a moment ago, with South Boulder Creek and New Zealand mud snails and other ecological factors, we want to make sure these trailheads are also doing their part in sustaining the ecological values in the area and how we have visitation in that area. So general renovation, refurbishment to that area, system-wide sign and communication. We talked a moment ago about interpretive signage, wayfinding signage. You all did see the presentation earlier this year from our signage program about all the great work with Spanish translation and other forms of communication. So that's really, again, pointing towards how do we inform our visitors and encourage good, responsible recreation. And then the Visitation Visitor Experience Survey will continue this year as well. I talked a bit about that and just gathering data from our visitors through those survey tools. Chapman Drive, another trailhead that's under design currently. We're working with the county to really highlight and kind of do the next phase of work now that the Boulder Canyon has been restored and rebuilt with the Boulder Canyon path up to Chapman Drive. This trailhead will support that and allow visitors to access that area as well. And then Gun Barrel site plan implementation. There's a host of work that's called out in a plan for the Gun Barrel area. And this will this year rather in 22, we're hoping to continue moving towards the phase 1 trail improvements. Once again, that allow us to really preserve and sustain that ecological area with having designated sustainably built trails in the corridor. And then finally, similarly at Red Rocks Trails, we've been working with our teams over the years to really look at how we improve those areas as well. It's a lot of steep eroded sections of legacy trails there, a lot of visitation, and we want to make those more sustainable and more user-friendly. So that's the general gist of the responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment. And I think next I'm going to turn it over to Mark Davison.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll follow up now with the focus area that's looking at community connections, education, and inclusion. When we did the master plan, the feedback from the community for the value related to this focus area was that together we build an inclusive community of stewards and seek to find our place in open space. Part of that discussion led us to 7 outcomes for this focus area. Of them, I would say inspiring environmental education, fulfilling community involvement, lifetime connections with nature, and that is in part to inspire a long-term response to the climate crisis, as well as engage youth inspired by nature are some of the sort of main focuses or outcomes we're hoping to achieve in this focus area. Tonight, we've actually got, 9 strategies for the focus area, and I'll touch on 4 of those in terms of what we did in 21, and then I'll talk a little bit about an upcoming project for 22. In terms of the fact, I just wanted to point out, you see on the right-hand slide, obviously rangers go about their work and, you know, whether it's the King Soopers shooting, the fires that have occurred, or day-to-day rescues that they do, it's all about public safety and taking care of the community. And I just wanted to point out there, rangers never ask for recognition. It's just part of the job to them. But you can see that last year they received 11 awards, 2 Medals of Valor, 1 Life-Saving Award, 1 Sheriff's Commendation, 2 Distinguished Service Awards, 3 Rocky Mountain Ranger Association Awards, and 2 Blue Gamma Awards. And in some ways that just highlights the professionalism of the group and the outstanding service they provide the community. Next slide, please, Leah. So, strategy, equity. What are we doing about that in terms of welcoming diverse backgrounds and abilities? And I just want to point out 3 projects from last year that were pretty successful. Jeff touched on one earlier. Basically, we set up a partnership with El Centro Amistad They actually worked with us on the master plan in terms of the community outreach. But if you remember, Juliette Bennell came to the board last year to talk about our first bilingual signage project at Sawhill Ponds. It was a complete success. We got fantastic feedback from the Latinx community. And in fact, it led to changes in the way we make signs that Bill, our sign manager, looked at the way we even communicate in terms of signage and how do we improve, for instance, not just the words, but the symbology of the signage. So that now is a project where we're hoping to grow across the system over time, as Jeff touched upon. The other thing we did was we created equity program coordinators, and that is people working directly with the Latinx community to create a more welcome environment for our programs. And perhaps the way I can explain that is sometimes when we set up programs with underserved communities, be it with Latinx community, aging population, disability community, that's great that we do that, but they become somewhat exclusive. It becomes only that underserved community where the program goes to. And Karen, I know you've pointed this out before, some of the successes that with this is making it inclusive programming where underserved communities are participating in typical programs so that it is really inclusive. And that's been a big success last year. The final one I mentioned is Nature Kids Boulder Pilot. This is done under the remit of the Boulder Nature Youth Initiative. And Curry and Lisa will be coming back to you from the E&O group later in the year about this and some of the efforts that are going on with youth. And what we're doing here is working with like 4 or 5 city departments. We're basically saying what type of programs do we provide for youth with an underserved focus. And with that pilot, we focused on the Latinx community and we're able to deliver a variety of programs. You see the photograph on the right, one of the programs Curry Rosado delivered, where that's been a real success because it's basically working with families and kids outside of a more curriculum-based approach, more of a sort of weekend, nighttime approach to have people involved in open space. Next slide. So this is a piece where I've got 2 slides on how we think about enhancing communication with visitors, CCEI 2. And this first one, you'll have heard the RIS group talking about a new database for the rangers. It'd been a few years in the making, maybe 52 years in the making, in honesty, the length of the ranger's lifetime. What's fantastic about this, and I'm excited to share it, it has been up and running since July. Rangers, it's an extra additional duty for the rangers to punch in the numbers on their phone, to punch in the details, but it's really working well. They've took it on board because, like RIS mentioned, it's data we can report out on to the community, the board, about the presence we have on the land, but it's also informing where we need to focus patrols, where we need to think about where there's issues are popping up. And we're seeing over time, if you imagine this 5 years down the road, we'll have more patterns emerge that will help direct how rangers do their work. So that's a very exciting development. And just a couple of factoids coming out of it so far is rangers made 17,000 contacts from July to December. And on the right, you see a little pie chart that talks about the different types of way rangers do their work. 374 miles of biking and 6,700 miles of hiking, which just starts to give a sense of how much work the rangers do within the system, and starts to, over time, we'll be able to provide more information about, like I was saying earlier, what is that presence in the field and what effect is it having on visitor behavior, safety, and enjoyment. Next slide, please, Leah. And so in terms of just continuing on with this theme, the other 2 focus groups that really are like the front line, as it were, of working with visitors is obviously on the bottom left here, the education and outreach group. Coming out of COVID, we sort of programs were 362 last year, a bit lower than normal, but still a really good delivery. That includes online programs with 17,000 participants. And again, later in the year, you'll have Lisa, Curry, and Dakota coming back to talk about, I think it's in October, a lot of the sort of basically advancement we've made in education programming over recent years because we had a strategic plan and we've got interpretive themes for the system now. And we've got SIG training, that's interpretive training for all staff who participate in education programming. And what that's doing is it's building up this more focused attempt to really figure out how we explain, for instance, land management, how we do focus on what it's like for youth to participate more. What is it like to think about climate change in our system? And with these focuses now on education programming, we're hoping that will improve communities' understanding of the land and their participation within any projects or programs we have. On the right, Janelle came to you, I think it was last month, with a volunteer update. So I won't spend much time on this, but you just get a sense of, 1,800 volunteers, 20 hours, 20,000 hours of time. And there you see like $600,000 just about in terms of the contribution that comes in terms of a monetary value from the volunteers. One of the things about this enhanced communication with visitors is, you see in the top left, that sort of phrase, presence on the land. We've been working really hard across the Ranger work group, the Education Outreach work group, and the volunteers to really think about what that means as a focused effort. And you'll hear more about that in the years to come. Next slide, please, Leah. The next strategy is CCI3, youth, and some of the work we've been doing in 2021. And I'd like to point out that this is sort of, I don't want to say emergent work, because I'd say it's more focused work. And there is some, because of the fires, it's actually given us a little bit more urgency, let's say. What it is we've been working with Growing Up Boulder on a partnership to work with them on youth. And the idea is, many of you will know Louise Tuala, who works for CU, has done nationally recognized for her work on connecting youth with nature. And she's actually going to be part of this team as we work with Growing Up Boulder. Some representatives for Thorn will be on the team. We've also got Boulder Community Health Partners on the team. And they're sort of support folk as we get into this idea of how do we collectively work with youth on the issues regarding climate, and in particular, the recent fires, for example. And there's a few things that are emerging. Louise Charles' paper, it's a wonderful paper she wrote on connecting youth with nature, building resilience and hope, focuses on like 4 main areas. And the first off is she's noticing through her research and desktop study work in this paper that 60% of youth now have anxiety about climate. And that is a huge number, isn't it? So how do we start to work with youth through this partnership effort with GOB on understanding their emotions and range of experiences? And the point about that is, on the flip side, when we look at how we think about it, it's, well, what is the hope for the future? So if we can look at the sort of trauma side of this and the emotions that create fear, on the positive side, you've got things like hope, excitement, enjoyment, relaxation in nature. How do we get the kids to connect with the nature connection along with their general anxiety connection? So it'll be looking at making the connection between the two. And then once we've got that in place, the goal is to move to thinking about what would inspire them to act in terms of what is it you could do in terms of, now that you understand resilience and hope and you understand some of the fears, what actions can you take on the ground? And hopefully that'll lead to some ideas from the youth about how we can improve our education programming, or even some like small scale interpretive infrastructure. So we're hoping we really get a good youth voice here to talk about climate and get really involved in some of the nitty gritty of what this means for the next generation. Next slide, please, Leah. In terms of CCI4, this is work that mostly actually Dan and Phil have been doing, really. I want to give a huge shout out there for all that work that's been going on. And it's, we've got these old MOUs that we had with tribal nations that basically in the last couple of years, the city council has picked up on, and the city manager's office, and Dan has been a leader in working with American Indian tribes and indigenous peoples over the last few years. What's emerged from that is a really good sort of tribal consultation process that we're now doing. I know board members have participated in that, and that'll be continuing. But we've heard from the tribes that Boulder is viewed as a city that is reaching out to the tribes, and they very much appreciate that. And it's almost a model for how other cities might be able to work with the tribes. In terms of a couple of projects that have come up, I think you're aware there's Fort Chambers Poor Farm Site Management Plan. Our new planning staff person will be working on this project with like Alison Eklund, Phil Yates, and a few other folk, Curry Rosado, Kristen from in terms of the archaeological side of things. Our goal is, though, before we dive into the project, to make sure we work with 3 of the sovereign tribal nations associated with the site and the unfortunate history, to ensure that we get the right engagement with the tribes first, these sovereign nations, understand their needs, and from there move into a more typical planning process where the tribes are working in parallel with us. And the last project on the list is the People's Crossing Working Group. This is the newly named open space site where we recognize now all histories on the site, and we'll see in the emerging years from the conversations that are occurring, some new interpretations of the site to better understand the history and reflect that true history of the site. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and it's just something to talk about, which I touched on earlier. We really, if you think about how the strategies work in the master plan, they're never isolated, aren't they not? For instance, here you'll see at the top, we've got two strategies. One is inspire environmental literacy and new involvement in OSMP, and the other is how do we do climate action now? And so not just working with youth, but in terms of the bigger picture, we're really starting to step back, especially after the recent fires, but we'd started this work previously. How do we think about what visitors need to know beforehand and what to do during a fire? How do we build resiliency and hope? And what does taking action look like? And how do we do this collectively so they're not like isolated topics? So the education team's working really hard on that, and you'll see more to come pretty soon. The volunteer and who also manage the volunteer group with Janelle Freestern, who also includes the Ready to Work, you've heard them mentioned tonight. We've been saying, well, when Ready to Work do projects for open space, can we have more of a climate focus and really get into the idea of how on the ground are we helping to create resilience? So there's conversations with other work groups thinking about how that might come together. And the last one I'll mention is the Ranger Cottage, which we all know is a little bit dated now in terms of the interpreted exhibit. It's got some really good animal displays, but maybe we need to think about that place because let's see, about 73,000 people pre-COVID actually went inside the Ranger Cottage. 700,000 approximately pass through the Ranger Cottage every year, the area. So it's an opportunity, isn't it, if we think about updating the interpretive exhibits to perhaps have a focus on climate change and what that will look like and the land management actions we're taking, especially because something like the Ranger Cottage is not typical community members come there, but it's where we get most of our outside visitors who are new to the system where we can provide that education immediately before they're set onto open space. So it seems like a good opportunity. And with that, that's just my summary for tonight. And I think it's Lauren is up next, if that's okay. Is that right, Lauren?
That's right. Thank you. And I'm going to keep it short and sweet because the last two presentations on budget and technology covered most of this, and I don't want to be too repetitive. This first slide here is about funding in 2021, and y'all spend a lot of time with the funding and with the budget, at least 5 touches over the course of the year. So you're very familiar with the ins and outs here, but 2021, as much as we had hoped it would be a focus on further implementation of the things we've been talking about, aligning the work plan and the master plan, getting progress going on BHAV, and we did those things. But we know we had a lot of emergent work around budget reductions and making sure we were stewarding our fund during economic uncertainty. So we went kind of from a scenario around the action plan to kind of quickly adjusting to a fiscally constrained version of master plan implementation as we were reducing budget. So in 2021, we met that requirement to reduce 10% of budget. We did that, we feel, in a very responsible way that set us up for resilience and success in 2022 and restoring budget. So that included cuts to non-personnel budgets, capital budgets, some ongoing services, and we were able to restore that through the 2022 budget. During that fiscally constrained scenario, we wanted to make sure we were still funding the highest priority items, making sure we were getting good work done out on the system across all of our different functions and services. And Sam touched on a lot of that in the CIP presentation earlier tonight. Even in a fiscally constrained scenario, budget downturn, budget reductions, we were still able to invest 70% of our funding, over 70% of our funding into tier 1 projects and programs. So super proud of the work that we were able to get done in tough circumstances in the community and of course, globally and nationally. So with the 2022 budget, you all work on this in 2021. So it's tough to call it a 2021 accomplishment when it's a 22 budget, but really that is when the work went in to building and approving the 22 budget. We were able to bring those things back, restore the cuts, and we actually were able to invest just over $500,000 additional funding through the 2022 budget in those tier 1 top priority items. So above and beyond what we had done pre-COVID. So a lot of success there. We feel really positive about the 2022 budget. And we feel like even after, 1 quarter of 22, we're seeing things get off the ground, our field season starting, and we feel like in 2021, we set ourselves up for success in 2022. So We've talked a couple times about the extension of the 0.15% sales tax increment, which was huge, particularly in an economic downturn and in a tough time during COVID. We talk about it in terms of it was less of a cut, which maybe is hard to kind of rally around, but it really was so impactful for us. We did meet the requirement to cut 10%, but that sales tax extension allowed us to have a shored up base funding so that we could be confident that we could get through the tough times and begin to program that money fully in 2022. Next slide. And then this slide kind of covers the non-financial elements of financial sustainability. So within the financial sustainability focus area, we also have strategies around real estate technology, which is covered under things like workforce development and operational needs, and the planning framework. So Bethany is here with you virtually every month. I think she had a record streak of the last 8 months of having different agenda items here at OSBT. So tons of work on those strategies, particularly in the world of conservation easement amendments. A lot of the work that you all saw in 2021 will finish process in 22. So we get a recommendation from the board, and then there's subsequent work with landowners and council to close out those projects. So a lot of what you saw last year will be finalized in 2022. But the big one, of course, is the acquisition of the conservation easement at Longstarden. So those were revenues that were collected off the 0.15 increment in 2020. And then we were able to close on that property at the end of the first quarter in 2021. So a huge accomplishment with a lot of community organizing and support. And that was only possible because of the extension of that tax. And we are very grateful for that support. The other that was closed out that you reviewed was the acquisition at Sombrero Marsh from Boulder County Parks and Open Space. And again, I anticipate that when we come back to you with the 2022 report, you'll see a long list of others that you've reviewed over the last few months. Technology, I don't think I need to say anything additional to what you've heard tonight. Some of the focuses which you heard were around asset management, deploying additional data sets, continuing to invest in work planning, and connecting asset management, work planning, budget, master plan implementation to make sure we're really moving in a consistent and clear direction. So in terms of what's upcoming, the only strategy I think I haven't really touched on is the planning framework. So we have a strategy in there that calls for an update to the planning framework. That is something that Mark and Casey French and team are working on, and we anticipate that will be coming to you in July with an update on that. So that is it for me. And I believe we have the interactive trail map to close out.
Yeah, we're going to close it out with that. And I'm going to invite Chad Brotherton in here to provide us a little bit of background of the virtual open house concept and what its version looks like for 2022.
Thanks, Dan. And hello, everyone. Trails Manager for Open Space, Chad Brotherton. And so want to jump into the open house and kind of give you a little bit of background of the evolution of the open house. In years past, we started a Trails open house. It was in person. Typically, we would do that around February or so. Giving some information about upcoming projects for that year. And it was pretty well attended. That kind of evolved, and we had also a vegetation and restoration resource stewardship open house in the fall. So we got to a point where we had these two open houses, and we got some feedback and decided to pull it all together and do like one general open house. So that was kind of evolution in the direction we were going. And then COVID hit in 2020, as you all are well aware of. And that really put us on hold with the open house concept. We didn't want to do anything in person. Nobody was doing anything in person. But as that evolved, as COVID evolved and, we started thinking about this, we came up with the idea of a virtual open house to provide that same information, just virtually. So it was easy to access, and that similar information, or even possibly more built out information, was a little more easily accessed. So last year, we kicked off our first virtual open house, and we got a lot of positive feedback from it. And it was a combination of trails, vegetation, and restoration projects. And we decided to extend that towards other master plan highlights, and really kind of highlight projects across the department, as all our deputies have been talking about this evening. So this is the open house is a way to access a lot of that information and look at like a general context also. So this is our second annual open house, and some of the projects that will be highlighted, education and outreach numbers will be included, the ranger statistics, as Mark was talking about, the funded research projects, trails projects, vegetation management, restoration, riparian and wetland restoration. So those are all projects that will be highlighted in this virtual open house. It'll be live next week, May 18th. And we'll be advertising, through all sorts of avenues, on our site, via email lists and social media. Not going to go into how it's all going to be advertised, but we'll be spreading the word out so people know where to find it and explore the information that's in there. And one of the really neat things, some of the pages on projects, there's a lot of information about the projects, but one of the neat things is the virtual map. And I just want to say thank you again to Mo and Mo's team. Great presentation, and also, this is one more example of their great work and how they help us, share out information. So I'm going to share my screen and give you a quick tour of the virtual map. If I can, let's see. Is that showing up now? Okay, thanks, Dan. Okay, so here, there'll be a link in the virtual open house. So you can click right in there, and this is what will come up. And there's a couple of ways to access this information. You can see that there's, ecological projects broken out, and then also trail projects. And one really great way to access this information or dig into it is, if you have an interest in a type of project, this index on the right, you can expand. And if you want to look at the map more, you can make it disappear. But you can expand into that and dig into a certain type of project. So forest thinning projects has been on everyone's mind these days, right? So as an example, you can click on the Canyon Side Forest thinning project, and it will bring you right to that in the map and give you a little bit of a highlight of, a brief explanation of what the project entails and kind of a time frame. So there's some information there. And I'm not going to dig into all that because it's really fun to kind of dig around in here and explore the information. Another example is, Enchanted Mesa. Forestry team, our FEMP team is looking at 80 acres in that area. So again, just great information on all these different types of projects. And I was actually going to point out a little bit more of the ecological side of things because I just find those so interesting. But in part because, this one of the topics tonight has been trail maintenance backlog and all of this. I think it's really interesting to look at the context across our system and the projects that we're looking at. So this goes beyond just CIP requests. This is like a balance of, okay, these are generally the highlight projects of the year, 2022. And if I'm looking across this, you see all the yellow is trail repairs, all the yellow triangles, green are trail reroutes. And in fact, all of those trail repair and all those trail reroute projects are actually taking care of pieces of maintenance backlog. And then, so you can zoom in or actually there's two ways to look at it. So trail repairs, you can zoom into like the first and second, legacy trail that we're, working on, consistently working on. Mount Sanitas was brought up. That's another one we're doing and will be continuing for years on that one. So that's a really neat way to explore the data. And then the other way to explore it is if you close out this index, you can actually just click on the projects themselves. So if you're interested in an area, you can hone in on that area and what's going on in Gun Barrel, and you can look at this project. There's also the Cottontail project. So if you look at the context in 2022, really it's mostly almost entirely trail repairs and reroutes that take care of maintenance backlog. So, and then one other thing that jumps out at me is the, if you look at the Chautauqua area where we have a lot of legacy trails, we're focusing a lot of energy, a lot of resources on the legacy trails of that area to address the maintenance backlog, and that you can dig into that information. So that's the interactive map, and some of the information that you can dig into. It's really fun. I actually got lost for quite a while in here learning about the resource projects in further depth and just looking at things in context. And I think, I guess with that, I will pass it back to Dan, and yeah, I'll pass it back to Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. And that really concludes the presentation. And I hope that the interactive map, we decided to spend a little more time on that this year than last year, just because it relates so much to everything we've been talking about today, is where can I find more information on it and where it is. And so hope you all have fun with that one. And like I said, it goes live very shortly. So with that, bring it back to you, Karen.
You're on mute, Karen.
My observation of the open houses, Chad, was that a lot of the excitement in the room was the open space visitors talking with each other and with staff. Is there any way that those kinds of interactions can occur, or is this just an information download?
Chad, I'll turn it over to you in just a second. So we had to make the decision of whether or not we wanted to go live or stick to the virtual or do a hybrid situation early this winter. And at that time, we just didn't know. So we made the call on the virtual for this year. But I think going forward, we would love to have a hybrid situation where we actually have a kickoff to this in real life. That was the format we were going to aim for until we had to make a decision. And at that time, things were not looking good. So ideally, Karen, going forward, is we would have sort of a kickoff celebration, an open house, people come, we have staff there to interact. And at that time, we do a little presentation about the interactive map as well as entertaining one-on-one questions. So ideally, that's the format we would like to move towards.
Nice idea, thanks. Tell me about opportunities to ask questions or make suggestions to the number of staff who just presented on the master plan part of the segment. Is there an opportunity to do that? Or
it's your time now. Sure.
Okay, do any of my fellow board members have questions? Or feedback for staff based on the master plan presentations?
There was a lot there, but I wanted to ask Jeff how you knew that they had done 4.6 Everest.
I was running alongside each of them the whole time and tracking it on Strava.
And exhausted.
No, that's kind of assumption. We just looked at how long the contractor, kind of looked through the numbers in the contract. We actually keep pretty detailed work tracking and invoicing for the contractors. And so we know how many days they're out there, and just given how long it took to do the work and then to go up and down that slope. So some assumptions there, and just kind of gathering all the details from the project. Like I said, we keep track of that pretty intently, so we can oversee the contract and invoice appropriately and all that. So yeah.
I mentioned earlier that I had a suggestion back when we were talking, Jeff, about some of the previous items on the agenda. And one of the things, as I read through the packet about the master plan, I kept writing down how much of that is in comparison. For instance, I'm on page 6 right now. It says you made progress on the maintenance backlog. And my question is, how much? I know you installed over 400 new timber steps and 784 rock steps and so much retaining wall. But when I look at the information services data, I see dashboards. And for instance, the dashboard that's on page 3 made me think, man, if every section of the master plan could have a couple of dashboards like that, it would really put in context the work that you're doing and give those of us who are not staff a sense of how much backlog had been taken care of. Or in the case of 55 pounds of dog waste, 55 pounds out of, I think I read in the Daily Camera, thousands of pounds of dog poop that's left on the system every year. So I would really like to see every single one of your work groups create at least 1 or 2 dashboard setups in like the one on page 5 of the of Mo's group's packet information, so that we can all see how much you've done in the context of how much is to be done.
Yeah.
How much of the agricultural infrastructure backlog has been worked on this year? How much of the trails backlog? How much, so that we have a sense of, you know, like the old thermometers for Red Cross pledges. How far up are we getting in terms of achieving our objectives?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and we're in alignment on that. And I'll answer that in 2 different ways. One is the dial that Mo presented. That was a 2018 baseline, and now 4 or 5 years later, providing where we're at with that dial. So we definitely intend to come at the 5-year point and provide you a scorecard, if you will, with several different measurement ways of looking at how we're doing on our strategies. So that is definitely in the works. Where, in fact, I just had another, I'll call them brainstorming meeting, but we're continually talking about that. And Brian and I just met about some enhancements to what that scorecard looks like, what's the expectation going to be from various groups. So that's definitely where we hope to be. I will say that our asset management program, when starting in 2019, was not as comprehensive as it would have been great to have had. So we had a very solid background, or let's say baseline, on everything, that all 46 strategies. So part of the asset management work we're doing right now is a little bit to establish some baselines so we could report back out on it. Trails would be one of those ones that we feel really confident that in 2024 we'll have a full system of monitoring with with a baseline of 2019 that we can reference for, and we'll probably be able to provide an enhanced look at, okay, 5 years in, where are we at with that dial? I would say I would feel pretty confident that for a number of them we'll have that. For some of it, we're still collecting that asset management inventory and condition of where we're at with at a certain location. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag between already having a baseline established and being able to report out on it versus the master plan now told us what to focus on, where our strategies are, and some of that baseline needed to be collected in the first few years of the master plan implementation period. So we're on the same page, Karen. And at the 5-year touch point, you're going to probably see, maybe it wouldn't be dials, but you're going to see a nice scorecard attached with, okay, now that we've invested the money where you told us to invest the money, now that we focused on the focus areas that we were told to focus in and to implement the strategies that we thought would be most effective in carrying out those focus areas, did we move the needle? So that's where we're headed.
That sounds good, but in the beginning, when you introduced this master plan section, you said that the charge was to simply and graphically for the public convey where we are. And I would advocate that every year you could very simply, without the level of complexity that you just described, show, for instance, somebody said 7.1% decrease in the prairie dog population out in the northern grasslands. Well, you know what the council approved goal was for prairie dog reductions out there. You know how much you've done in any given year, and there could simply be a little graphic that says so many, we've removed so many prairie dogs in comparison to this goal. I'm not talking about the wheels and the level of complexity that you just described. I'm talking about on an annual basis, getting the information in a simple graphic form so that the public at a glance can see some of the markers for some of the more important elements of the work that's being done, like trail maintenance backlog, prairie dog removal, those kinds of things.
Got it.
And I really don't want to wait 5 years. I want to see it year by year. I'd be happy to see that your big complex thing in 5 years. Anybody else?
I don't know that I have a specific question. I just want to say thank you to everyone that presented. Mark, I really like the stuff that you were talking about with connecting youth with nature. I think that all of that's, so valuable to the system, if not the most important thing to the system. So thank you guys for all of that. I guess it's getting late and I'm tired. I just wanted to say I'm looking at my notes real quick to see if there was anything else that we didn't touch on, but I think we covered it.
Thanks, Caroline. Dan, you were going to go ahead and do a few more verbal updates.
Yeah, I'll try to keep these really brief. The in-car fire, as most of you know, we presented to council along with some other city departments on the in-car fire, provided us an opportunity to talk about land management and mitigation strategies, which was fantastic. Just want to let you know that it's still not quite clear of where council is going to be headed with this. As you know, they selected in the beginning of their term 10 priority initiatives or projects they want to focus in on. They'll have a midterm sort of mid-year look at that. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe sort of wildfire or disaster resiliency became a top, I guess we call it a baker's 11, if you will. But we're still waiting to kind of see what the next step with council may be, but that's not slowing our work down at all. We have 2 projects I think I've alluded to. One is internally building and enhancing our sort of process and procedures for how we respond to disaster on open space. That is an effort that Jeff's heading up, and we're really making great progress and look forward to reporting out of that to you in the coming months, if not before the end of the year. And John is setting up a collaborative project with fire department to look at enhanced ways that we could collaborate more effectively and efficiently with fire department and other regional agencies on the ground fire prevention and mitigation. And again, that is one that I would suspect would be getting daylighted once that project is completed. And we've had a chance to go over that with the city manager and get feedback from city manager's perspective. And so we'll get back to you when that project is done as well. So unless there's any other questions, I think from the in-car fire update, I think that's pretty much the story. I will let you know that we participated in a field trip that did an on-site assessment of the in-car burn area to determine the severity of it and the risk of, let's say, runoff, if you will. It was determined that it was a low burn severity across the vast majority of the burn area. There's a lot of roots intact. There's active regrowth happening throughout the impacted areas. And there's a lot of rock in the area, which sort of helps in that regards. So overall, the field trip confirmed what staff was already intuitively coming up with a conclusion that unless we have a significant event, you know, 100-year type of storm event, that we'll probably will not be seeing high sedimentation loads and debris coming into Bear Creek. So that was an interesting field trip that staff got to participate, hearing from experts out on the field. And it was nice to see that our initial thoughts were confirmed. So.
Did they give you any written updates from what you just described? I don't know if anything was like internal or if there was like a report about it.
This field trip just occurred, but I don't know, John, if you would have a sort of a next step in what that
if they didn't create one or it wasn't intended, I just didn't know if like what you were reading from was just something to.
Oh, those are my notes from.
Yeah, no written report.
Summary notes. John came back from the field trip. He kind of gave me the lowdown and I wrote them down.
And there won't be a map, a severity map or anything like that.
They are working on a burn severity map. It was described as rough GIS, maybe not for regular use or anything, but I do have a request in to get a copy of anything that they have, and we'll see if it's useful or not.
Good, thanks.
Next, I just wanted to provide just another plug for our May 25th field trip. We're meeting at the hub at 3 o'clock. We're going to visit some irrigated field restoration areas. We had a little rain, 8 days ago? We're seeing if it holds. Hopefully things looked progressed in terms of the vegetation, and but looking forward to spending the late afternoon with you all on the 25th. I don't know if there's any questions amongst the board for that. Karen did raise a good suggestion of if there's any possibility of getting some pertinent materials out ahead of time rather than handing them out to you at the day of the event. So we will treat it sort of like a regular board meeting in which we'll get a meeting packet prepared and we'll get that in your hands at least a few days ahead of time. And we'll try to be as responsive and give you as much information ahead of time as we can. So we'll do that and also post it. So look forward to a packet that will ahead of time that will support the field trip.
And you mentioned the ag fields. Will we be attending to prairie dog removal at all in the field trip as well?
Well, these sites will be where prairie dogs were removed last year, and then how we came in, and so it'll be more focused on what do we do once they're removed and what restoration
Okay.
look like. So that's sort of the theme.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And finally, just a couple of quick updates. One is we have a couple of volunteer opportunities tomorrow. In fact, at 5:15 at Dowdy, BME Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance and Open Space is leading a volunteer trail restoration maintenance project to address some erosion and braiding. So if anyone's interested at meeting at Dowdy Draw Trailhead at 5:15 tomorrow, there'll be a group that will be doing some restoration work. And if you love trail work, June 4th is National Trails Day. And last year, I believe we had about 50 participants. This year, we're going to be meeting at Chautauqua and walking up to the ski jump trail, where we're going to be doing a really good maintenance project up there. That whole day, 8 to 4, staff will be up there. Volunteers and public are welcome to attend any portion of that day that they can, that's available to them. So 8 to 4 on June 4th. If you go to the Ranger Cottage, I'm sure our staff can point you to the way of where we're at work up there. And finally, I just wanted to alert you that there's a lot of interrelated items and decision-making going on around El Dorado Springs Drive and El Dorado State Park. As you know, every year, it seems the past couple of years, after there's been various aspects that has been tried out. Last year, we participated in a checkpoint in order to address congestion that was happening when the park became full. This year, it gets a little bit more complicated because we have several things going on. One is earlier this week, CPW approved a timed entry reservation system, I believe, for the park. So the park staff has the go-ahead on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays to go to a reservation system for El Dorado State Park. That will take a little bit of time to put in place. So it's likely not going to be until later in the summer when that becomes available. And it, depending on if any hiccups, it could even be pushed more towards, let's say, August, September. But that at least provides us some clarity of what's going to be happening in terms of the park, because things cascade from there in terms of what we might participate in impacts to that roadway, if you will. So we don't know whether or not there's going to be another checkpoint. I think until the reservation system is in place, there could be a checkpoint system like we did last year. It actually ran very smoothly. Rangers were very, surprised and happy on how that went. It is very staff intensive for sheriff's office. And so we'll get confirmation of whether or not a checkpoint is planned leading up to the reservation system. The shuttle system is definitely going to be a go. And so OSMP has been asked to participate. If we decide to participate, we will do so on a one-year trial basis and want to make sure that we have any monitoring in place so we can report out on what we feel were the changes and the impacts to that. A lot of the details, this is all basically fresh news as of in the last week or so. So I don't have a lot of details, but we know from the shuttle perspective, if we, for a one-year pilot project from the OSMP perspective, it would not cost us any money to participate. We're just talking about ways that we could actually measure outcomes of that particular option. And the other thing that's feeding all into this is the sheriff's office and whether or not, on how aggressively they are going to approach no parking along that whole roadway. There's been some talk about closing all parking on that roadway to reduce fire risk and to reduce the danger of dogs and people walking along that roadway. Because what we're seeing is now people parking a half mile away from the trailhead and walking that road and parking along in dry grass. So that decision is yet to come. So it's all these moving parts, a long-winded way of saying, once things become clear, I will probably shoot you off an email address or an email, because it's likely that some of these things the dust will have settled before we meet next. So.
Moving parts and multiple agencies.
Dan, do we have any recent updates on the status of the park management plan for El Dorado?
Well, I think the reservation system was a big component of that. So they're obviously moving into the implementation phases of the plan. The reservation system was one of the key components of it. But as far as, are you referring a little bit to the trail connectivity and that sort of thing? No, there hasn't been any talk with that, as far as I know, unless we're informed otherwise that that's not moving forward, and so zero staff time has been put towards it. So
that's correct, Dan.
The letter from the state basically said that it was
Yeah.
done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the current situation. All right, so with that, Karen, we'll turn things over to you.
I'm gonna go ahead and drop. I'm already 10 minutes off of my 9:30 timeframe. So I think Leah, I don't know if you have to mark that in your minutes that I've left the meeting. Thank you all. Good night.
We've all gotten the memo from Dan about the in-person meetings being delayed further. I don't know if you have any more information since you wrote that memo, Dan. But
I really
guess
don't.
is we won't be meeting in person in June, but perhaps in July. Is that right?
They're now shooting for July. The complicating, there's so outside of the technology and the training that needs to be done for staff and the hiccups and that they're working through. The other thing is council's now moving to Thursday nights, starting in July. And what that means is several boards and commissions need to be shifting. And so, to be honest, it hasn't even been set is who's going to be using council chambers when we all come back. And so I just wanted to daylight that. There's been no decision making on that, but I don't even know if open space is actually going to be in chambers, and if we're not, where we're headed. So we're a little.
What I read is that planning board is going from Thursday to Tuesday.
Yep. So there's been some date reshuffling that has landed, but I know that the configuration of who's going, what rooms are going to be used, and where the technologies need to be, and who's using those technologies has not been decided. So I was trying to get a little bit more detail before I hopped on tonight. I just don't have more. So I would say look forward to our monthly email update that I put out to you all, and I'll try to get as much detail. But again, we're shooting for July to do a hybrid scenario. I'm hoping it's in council chambers, and if things deviate from that, I'll keep you up to date.
And it's everybody's job to keep fingers and toes crossed that we don't slip from July.
Right.
Okay.
But the good news is we'll see you all in person on the 25th of May.
Right. Okay, and the only other question that I have for the board tonight before we adjourn is I want to ask if the board has an interest when we have information items in our packet, as we do this month and most months, whether you want to have a time during the matters from the board segment of the meeting to ask questions of staff or comment about those information items. Whether adding that to the agendas when we have information items is something that you would like to have.
I think that's a good idea. I guess informally, I figured that we've been kind of doing that, but if we want to make it more official, I think that's fine. Because I do think there's some issues or questions or concerns that come out of the information items as well.
John and Caroline, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a good idea. I do feel like, everyone does get tired at the end. So I feel like I've always been one to say that I would be fine with like adding a meeting time. So I don't know if there would be like just another option, like once a month where we meet to really just discuss matters from the board and able to cover all of it in something that isn't drawn out late. Because I would like to feel that I can discuss it with like the depth and entirety that I need to, and not worry so much about how late we're going. So that's an option, maybe to problem solve, like a super late hour, because I definitely agree there are things that I think warrant discussion for the position, and I'd like to do it without feeling like I'm keeping everyone up real late.
John?
Yeah, I agree. It's challenging at the end to talk about these issues, but I wonder how much would be appropriate for us to, email Dan our questions one-on-one, because all both of the topics that I've written updates on, we're going to discuss, CU South next month in excruciating detail, and
Right.
the update on the bikes implies we're going to have several meetings to talk about it and get public input. So
I think there's only one other meeting scheduled for the board for the bikes, which is in late fall and winter.
That's where the action item will
Yeah.
be. We put that as definitely, there'll be a definite touch in late fall. So
But
whether or not there's
What my
touches
question
be-
is,
Yeah.
what my question is about that item is whether the board would like to have any discussions about that with staff before we get to late fall, winter. Because I don't see on the timeline, I mean, I see public meetings, but I don't see board discussions.
And John, I think that like the emailing back and forth and stuff is sufficient for a lot of things, but at least for myself, speaking personally, I do find that I wish that I had more time to communicate with all the board members. And, obviously doing that is only possible in the public setting. So that's just something I've noticed since my time on the board, that I would always welcome more time with you guys.
Well, and the kinds of questions that you might have, John, I might not even think of. So I can't find out what questions you had and what kind of responses you had unless it's done in a public meeting.
Yeah.
Because I can't get a copy of your email.
Yeah, of course. And when I read the update on e-bikes, for example, right, it seemed implied that there would be several opportunities for us to discuss it at upcoming meetings, and maybe I misread that.
Yeah, so I'll go back with project staff on that, and this is a little bit of evolving of what the next 8 months is looking like. So I'll promise to go have a touch base and see what I'm hearing is initially before we go into the recommendation mode, a touch before that to support ultimate decision making would be recommended.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I think it warrants some further conversation about an additional meeting where, these items are the information items or items of note for board members are the agenda. And maybe, we have one additional meeting a month where that's the case, because I agree at the late hour, when it comes up, matters from the board come up, we're not at our finest, and it would be much better, I think, if we had, somewhat more informal conversation about some of these things than, specific board meeting warrants. So I think it's worth our considering, perhaps as necessary, having an additional meeting once a month to handle some of that stuff.
Do you think maybe quarterly would be enough?
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, we could just start and see what, at the end of the meeting, do we feel good? Do we feel like we were able to cover? Like, there might be times where we are able to cover what's happening that quarter. And then maybe there's one particular topic that we, spend time on. So,
Karen,
I support it.
Karen, maybe we could spend a little bit more time than just, how we go over the next 3 months, and just dive into this a little bit when we touch base next about future agendas, and just have a little brainstorm about that.
Sounds good. Okay. Any other comments anybody on the board wants to make? Okay, thank you very much. And I will call the meeting adjourned. And I'll see you all on Wednesday, May 25th at 3 p.m.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.